Special meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Councilmember Frieden.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Stettin.
Here.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, not yet present. And Mayor Ross.
Here. All right, very good. And we have, okay, wait. Okay, that's right. Thank you. All right, very good. You have an item to read?
Yes. Item 1, fiscal year 2025 downtown parking budget recommendations.
All right, very good. Now, we have a presentation to make and then discussion. I'm going to ask that people online and in person, if they want to speak to this item, that's the only items we're taking, is to the item, put in their slips by 1:15 or raise their hand online by 1:15. And with that, we'll go to staff presentation. Mr. Maurer.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. Cliff Maurer, Public Works Director. I just wanted to kick this off and then turn it over to our, excuse me, very capable downtown team. Ms. Clark and her team have worked exceedingly hard to develop a parking rate structure that serves the community, our residents, our guests, and certainly our business as well. It's not lost on me that parking is a very emotional issue, and it is a very complex issue. There are a lot of factors that contribute to people's perceptions and people's experiences with parking. There's also science behind it, a lot of research, and I do want to brag on the team that they spent an enormous amount of time going through tens, if not hundreds, of scenarios to come up with some good options. I think they truly have found a great option, but I also understand that there's education required and there's time required. So we've are presenting more than one option. And with that said, we are willing to listen to whatever direction, of course, that you give us to help find the right solution and implement, even if that requires implementation over time. Of course, we have the financial situation in front of us, which is significant and not improving. So all this is based on also solving that at the same time. So with that said, I will turn it over to Ms. Clark and her team for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Sarah Clark. I'm the Public Works Downtown Team Manager, and I'm here today with Ed France, who's our Downtown Plaza and Parking Manager, to present our recommendations for the downtown parking budget for fiscal year 2025. So before I go any further, I would like to take a moment to thank our downtown parking staff, who, as Mr. Maurer mentioned, have put in an enormous amount of work to get us to this point. We knew when we submitted our two-year budget last year that we'd have to make some pretty major changes to our operation in order to generate sufficient revenue to fund our program for FY25. So we've been working on this in some form pretty much since fiscal year started back in July. So in addition to Ed, who's only been with us for a little over a month now and has had to hit the ground at a full sprint, I'd especially like to thank Megan Salas, who led our budget preparation this year and who has run numbers and analyzed countless scenarios for revenue generation and expenditure cuts. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Kayla Todd, who's our accounting assistant, and Ethan Pitney, who's our parking resources specialist, who both provided data and research support for this effort. So let's get into it. At this point, you're all aware that the downtown parking budget is facing major challenges this year. as we have for the last several years now. Today I'm going to walk you through what those challenges are and then discuss a solution that we've developed after, again, as Mr. Maurer mentioned, months of research, analysis, and community conversations. We're also going to be presenting an alternative option that does not require us to make these changes, but which does create new obligations for the general fund and for Measure C this fiscal year. So we presented both of these options to Finance Committee on April 30th, and they voted to forward both of these options to full council for consideration. So based on the feedback that we've received, we've developed an updated recommendation for what we're calling a hybrid plan. So under this plan, our FY25 budget would reflect the alternative proposal, but with a delayed, phased implementation of the proposed changes to parking rates in city garages, surface lots, and on streets in the Central Business District. So this map gives an overview of the parking system in our Central Business District. The circles outlined in yellow are our parking structures, and the blue circles are our surface lots. So we currently operate 5 parking garages and 10 surface lots in the downtown area, although that number is going to drop to 8 once the Coda and Carrillo commuter lots are redeveloped for the new police station and the Missing Middle Housing Project. And the downtown parking system has been serving downtown for over 50 years now. So every year, we process between 3 and 5 million customer transactions in our parking lots. And that's to say nothing of the people who use our commuter lots, which means that, as I said at Finance Committee, if we were McDonald's, our sign would read over 100 million served at this point. So we've employed thousands of local youth, giving many of them their first job experiences. We are often the first thing that people experience when they arrive in Santa Barbara and the last thing that they see before they leave. And so we take that responsibility very seriously. Having a shared public parking system has enabled us to develop a beautiful, walkable Central Business District without all of the parking lots and the strip malls that characterize so many other cities in California, in particular our neighbors to the south. But our system is not and has not for many years been generating enough revenue to maintain our capital assets. So the parking structure that you see here, which is the library garage, was built in 1969. So it's about 54 years old now, which for a parking garage is kind of prehistoric. The Libero garage was built in 1977. Lots 2 and 10 were built in conjunction with Paseo Nuevo back in 1988. And our newest facility, which is the Granada garage, is now about 20 years old. So these facilities are well into their service life and they require significant investment to maintain. So just for an example, this past year we spent over $180,000 just to keep the elevators running. So this is no major catastrophic failures, this is just regular maintenance, the occasional breakdown, fixes of those equipments. We're spending over $300,000 to make roof deck repairs this year, and more of them are needed because, again, that's something that we haven't been able to invest in a while. The badly deteriorated pavement in Lot 5 is going to cost around $800,000 to repair and repave this year. And that's a project that we had originally scheduled for several years ago, at which time we were quoted between $300,000 and $400,000. So by deferring that capital this long, the project has doubled in cost. So you get the point. Our legacy infrastructure is well into its service life. It requires significant investment to maintain, but it's absolutely critical to the functioning of our downtown. And this is not a new problem. It wasn't caused by COVID, although COVID and the major revenue losses that we experienced in association with that certainly compounded the problem. We've been aware of a structural deficit for years. Back in 2015, we projected that our fund would exhaust reserves around 2024, and here we are. We're facing rising costs, just like everybody else is. Wages, again, that deferred capital, insurance, overhead. On top of all of this, we don't use the best management practices that are common in other cities in order to optimize our revenue. So back in 2019, when Walker Consultants analyzed our finances and determined that our funding gap was in fact large and growing, between 2020 and 2031, they estimated that we needed to be generating an average of $2.57 million more in revenue annually than we had been in order to sustain our system and fully fund our capital needs. And that estimate was before inflation took off, and again, some of our costs have quite literally doubled since then. And then there's the matter of the subsidized parking period. So the 75 minutes free courtesy of local merchants might have been true years ago, but now our parking and business improvement area assessments covered less than 15 minutes of the quote-unquote free parking. The rest of it is subsidized by the city to the tune of about $4 million each year. And this PBIA assessment is very difficult and labor-intensive for the city to collect. For example, this year, we estimate that we're going to lose about $170,000 from businesses who simply haven't paid and we aren't able to collect. So let's get into some of those numbers. In fiscal year 2023, we managed to only deplete our reserves by about $290,000, and that was due largely to the one-time ARPA funds that we received to cover a portion of the revenue that had been lost during COVID. So we knew we'd have a deficit going into FY24. We'd initially hoped to have higher fees for outdoor business facilities on State Street approved, along with a 15-minute reduction in the subsidized free parking period. But without those changes, we projected that we're going to be running about a $270,000 deficit. Unfortunately, it's looking like we're going to fall short of our revenue projections and spend more than we'd expected, again, those rising costs, leaving us with about a $1.8 million deficit and dropping our reserves balance below council policy levels. So for fiscal year 25, if we account for the expected cost increases and planned capital, but we don't take any action to make changes to increase our revenues, we can expect to run about a $3.8 million deficit, which would exhaust our reserves entirely and require at least a $2.7 million general fund transfer in order to support our operation. So given the city's financial position and the general fund deficit that's already expected, this would not be recommended. It would be a major impact to the city's reserves, and that would only compound over time. So the blue line on this graph indicates what we should have in reserves according to council policy. The green bars represent where we are now, and then the red bars show where we would end up under a budget scenario that didn't have any changes. So those red bars indicate the magnitude of total general fund subsidy that would be required as the years progress. And as I noted earlier, this is a structural issue. It's not new. The deficit is a result of how the parking system is managed and funded. And here's the problem. So everybody loves free parking, of course, but that 75-minute free period creates some issues. First off, it's a huge driver of customer behavior. A lot of folks race back to their cars to try to dip out without having to pay, which is exactly the opposite of what we want them to do when they're downtown. We want them to stay, we want them to shop and dine and enjoy themselves. So it's actually incentivizing people to get in and out and to leave downtown quickly. And also in our parking lots, roughly 55 to 60% of our transactions are free transactions, and that ratio really has not changed over the years. So coupled with the people who take advantage of free street parking, roughly 70% of people who drive downtown pay nothing. So this means that we have to fully fund our system, all of that aging infrastructure that I just described, on the backs of fewer than 30% of our customers, of the people who use it. And this simply doesn't work. It's not what the city does at the waterfront or the airport, the other public parking facilities that we operate. It wouldn't work for any business to give away 70% of their products or services for free. And then adding to that, street parking is also free. So this means that we're challenged with running a paid parking system that is right next to a free parking system. And a lot of those free spaces are closer to people's destinations, meaning that they're even higher value. So people cram into those on-street spaces. You have employees who are doing the 75-minute shuffle or the 90-minute shuffle, or who are flat out parking all day in the high-value customer and residential parking. We've had people tell us that they just take a chance on getting a ticket, and as long as it doesn't happen too frequently, it still ends up cheaper than paying for parking in the parking lots. So street parking becomes hard to find for visitors, and you've got very little turnover of those spaces, and then people end up parking illegally. They leave their cars in loading zones or even on the red curves because they want to be close to their destination and they don't want to pay for parking. So the bottom line is the whole setup, this whole system, isn't working the way that it needs to work in order to serve our downtown community. So our goals for this effort are to shore up downtown parking's finances and to eliminate the structural deficit, but it's also to fix all of those other problems by modernizing our parking system and by implementing best management practices that are common in both big and small cities all across the country. So right now our parking system is being managed separately from our off-street system, but the reality is that they're one system and they have to be managed that way. So what happens in the parking lots impacts what goes on in the streets and vice versa. So we want to unify the parking system. We want to keep people downtown longer. We want to stop them from racing back to their cars in order to try to get out under the wire. We want to move employees and other long-term parkers off of the streets and out of our high occupancy service lots and into our parking garages where we've got plenty of capacity. We need to get away from the 30-70 breakdown of who pays and who doesn't and share the cost more evenly across all users, which actually allows us to make it cheaper for many of our customers. We did a big customer survey this past fall, and probably the #1 comment that we got was the need for cheaper employee parking. So we also want to be able to do that. We want to be able to fill that need and reduce the cost of doing business downtown and of working downtown. And of course, by doing all of this, we're able to continue to operate and maintain our system and provide the services that are so critical to the heart of our city. Healthy parking system management and revenues allows downtown parking to serve so many functions that have become essential in downtown and to buffer our program for a rainy day. So by operating as an enterprise fund, the system is funded by the people who use it, the people who drive downtown and park their cars, and not the people who walk or ride bikes or take transit. In turn, all of those revenues then are invested back into downtown, into cleaning, into repairing our facilities, into maintaining State Street, and into being the eyes and ears of our downtown area. Parking staff certainly are not first responders, but a lot of times we are the first on the scene when something goes wrong in downtown. A lot of times we end up being the ones who spot it, the ones who are able to call in police, fire, EMS as needed. And in turn, this allows the city to focus its general fund revenues on other critical basic services such as police, fire, libraries, and parks. So in trying to figure out how to meet those goals, as we discussed, we looked at probably 100 other alternatives. We met with our stakeholders, we had in-depth conversations, we solicited feedback wherever we could. We've brought this issue to our downtown parking committee 3 or 4 times at this point. So let's take a look at both the original proposal and the alternative proposal. So this chart shows the status quo for FY25. So that's with no changes to our revenues or our expenditures. In the middle then, you see the original proposal, and on the right, you see the alternative proposal. So right now, our PBIA assessments generate about $1 million a year. Street parking is fully subsidized, and in our parking garages and lots, we subsidize 75 minutes of free parking, and then after that, it's $3 an hour with a $33 daily maximum. Our employee permits range anywhere from $40 to $175 a month, though, as I mentioned earlier, these low-end commuter permits are being phased out because we are losing those lots. So really, our permits that you can purchase today run between $145 and $165 a month. And once again, this leaves us with a $3.8 million deficit if we don't make any changes to our expenditures. The alternative proposal would leave all of that unchanged, but would transfer approximately $980,000 from the general fund to subsidize our plaza maintenance activities and $2.35 million from Measure C in order to subsidize our capital program. And the original proposal just kind of shakes all of that up. So here's what that proposal includes. So it includes a minor adjustment to the PBIA to account for inflation. This is not going to generate much revenue, only about $30,000. But going forward, it will help us keep pace with increasing costs a bit better. We want to encourage people to use our garages for long-term parking. So we're proposing to reduce the free period by 15 minutes, but to also lower the hourly fee from $3 an hour, which it is currently, to $2 an hour. And then perhaps most importantly, we want to implement a $10 daily maximum charge in those parking garages. So the most you'd ever pay to stay all day is $10, and right now it's $33. So that's a huge decrease. Our surface lots are different. People like them. People tend to prefer them to garages. They're smaller, and they do fill up, particularly at peak hours. So we want these to be used more for short-term parking and to create more turnover and availability in those popular lots. We want to reduce the free period to 15 minutes so you can still pop in and out if you want to do a quick errand or pick something up without paying. After that, we'd keep the hourly rate the same at $3 an hour, but we'd charge in smaller increments so that you wouldn't have to pay for the whole hour if you only go 15 minutes over. So we charge $1.50 per half hour with no daily maximum because, again, this really isn't where we want people to be parked all day. But now for the biggest change, that would be the streets. So we need to fold street parking into our system. Like the surface lots, excuse me, We want these high-value spaces that are right in front of our businesses to turn over frequently. We want it to be easy for customers to find spaces so that they don't need to circle the block or try to take up loading zones. So we'd implement a pay-by-plate system, again, with a free 15-minute parking period for quick stops, and then charge 75 cents per 15 minutes thereafter. So it's still $3 an hour, but you'd be able to pay in even smaller increments. So doing all of this allows us to drastically reduce the cost of employee parking in our garages. So right now, again, those permits are running between $145 and $175 a month. We drop that down to just $70. So if you work full-time, 20 days a month, that comes out to just $3.50 a day. So altogether, we estimate that this would generate an additional $3.3 million in revenue each year. But for this year, we'd also make some changes on the expenditure side. We'd estimate that implementing street parking would cost us about $1 million. So we'd be adding that in, and then we'd also be deferring other major capital projects with the hope being that we could start to rebuild our reserves this year, make tweaks as needed to shore up revenues for next year, and be in a better position to spend on capital going into FY26. So the bottom line on this one is that we'd estimate very conservatively that we'd come out with about a $400,000 surplus. So under either proposal, we'd continue to operate below our mandated reserves. Due to that, plus the uncertainty associated with implementing this new management strategy, Finance is planning for a $500,000 general fund transfer if we pursue the original proposal. But the hope would be that our revenues, which would come in stronger than predicted. Like I said, it's a very conservative projection. So hopefully we could avoid having to pay that if we do come in stronger. But we're still going to need to explore for the future more innovative options in order to rebuild our reserves balance. So a few more details on the alternative proposal, this idea of funding our capital needs via Measure C and then having the general fund support promenade services. This proposal would require just shy of $1 million in general fund subsidy, plus an additional $2.35 million in Measure C support. But as you can see, it would enable us to pursue our planned capital program. So for FY25, that includes a much-needed revenue control system replacement, repairs to garage floors and roof decks. Like I mentioned, that's one of the things that we're a bit behind on. Repairs to the roof of the Amtrak building, the addition of cable barriers to improve safety in the Libero garage, and some improvements to the Ray Road entrance of the depot lot. So under this scenario, we wouldn't be able to afford to offer those lower rates and permit prices that we discussed before, but we would retain subsidized street parking and a subsidized 75-minute free period in all the lots and garages. We'd also retain the $3 an hour rate and the $33 daily max, so no changes for the customer under this scenario. So I know that these proposed changes seem pretty drastic, but I want to emphasize that everything that we are proposing has been intentionally and carefully designed to encourage longer stays, to provide choices for convenience and value, and to serve the economic vitality of downtown, which is our program's mission. So let's take a look at how this impacts some of our typical customers. So the people who are really going to be impacted by this are two groups. So the long-term parkers who are doing the 75-minute shuffle either on street or in the parking lots to avoid paying for parking, and people who park between 60 and 75 minutes. So everybody else is going to at least have an option for paying less or breaking even. So we show those three columns here, what you'd pay in the garages, what you'd pay in the surface lots, and then what you would pay on street. So starting at the bottom, those 75-minute shufflers who aren't paying now could move into a monthly permit for $70 a month, so from free parking to $3.50 a day. If they want to park on street right in front of their business or in a surface lot, it is going to be pretty pricey. That could get up to $25. Somebody who's just coming in for their lunch break is only parking for an hour. Right now, that's free. That continues to be free in the parking garages. Or if they want to park a bit closer or they want that convenience, they can pay up to $3 in the surface lots or $2.25 on the street. Picking up to go order, again, 15 minutes. That remains free across the board, but with price on-street parking, you'd actually be able to park closer. The goal would be to maintain 1 to 2 free spaces on a block so that you always have a space available for somebody who's looking to utilize closer parking. So for shopping, let's say you go downtown for 2 hours and shop. Right now, that'll cost you $3 if you park in any of our lots. That would go down to $2 if you're in the garage. If you want to park in the surface lot, that would go to $6, and it would be $5.25 on the street. So again, a little bit more expensive than what you're currently paying for that convenience. Let's say you're going out for drinks at night. You're maybe having one too many. We want you to leave your car overnight and take a taxi home. We do not want people driving when they're under the influence. So right now, again, our daily max is $33, and that would be the charge. That would go down, again, in the garages to $10. It would go up a little bit in the service lots to $36, and on street, it'd be slightly less, actually. It'd be $32.25, depending on exactly when you left. So for the part-time minimum wage employee, for somebody who's working a 4-hour shift, right now that costs $9 a day if they're paying daily, or again, that $145 to $165 a month permit. In the garages, that goes down to $6 a day if they want to continue to pay the hourly price, or $70 a month with a permit. It's a little bit more expensive in the surface lots. Again, that's $12 or $11.25 on street. But then let's take a look at somebody who is meeting a friend for coffee. So 45 minutes. Right now that's free. In the garages, that would remain free. If you want to park a little bit closer, it would cost $1.50. So not a huge increase. It'd be $1.50 more if you wanted to park closer, or you still have that free option in the parking garages. For dinner at an hour and a half downtown, again, right now in the garage, it's $3. That goes down to $2 in the garage. Or again, if you wanted to park on street and be right there, it goes up 75 cents. So up to $3.75. For 4.5 hours, let's say dinner and a movie, you're going downtown for a night out. Right now, that's $12 if you park in any of our parking facilities. That goes down to just $8 in the parking garages, or it goes up slightly on street to $12.75, or in the surface lots to $13.50. So there's obviously been quite a lot of concern from businesses about how this will affect them. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at what that would mean. So first, for employees, we'll talk about this a little bit more on a later slide, but if you're paying for your your employees' parking permits, that bill will get cut in half. Then there's the customers. So back in the fall, we did a big citywide parking survey, as I mentioned, where we asked people to rank what their priorities were when they're deciding where to park. And the choices that we gave them were proximity to destination or convenience, cost, cleanliness, and safety. And the largest number of respondents, so 42%, selected convenience or proximity to their destination as their top priority, even over cost, which was the second most popular choice. So what this system does is it gives customers that choice. There's the convenient option. We're opening up spaces to enable people to park right in front of businesses or to park in a surface lot, and you'll pay a little bit more for that. Or you have the value option over in the parking garages, where people who prefer lower cost can still find an hour of free parking and then lower fees after that. I'm going to skip ahead one slide here, actually, because I want to emphasize that this model works. So here's a local example. This is the Collection down in Oxnard, super popular shopping destination. There's tons and tons of free parking around the outside in the surface lots and garages. But on the roads that run through the center of the development, what do we see? We see parking meters, and those spaces fill up anyway. People choose to park there even though they have a free option because it is closer and more convenient. So let's move on to downtown employees. Again, as I mentioned before, both over the past year in our outreach efforts, as well as in previous years, probably the number one thing that we hear is the need for more affordable employee parking. And these changes to our parking management model allow us to do that. So right now, somebody who works downtown has 3 options. They can pay the hourly fees, which might run about $24 for a typical 8-hour day. They can pay for a parking permit, which again runs about $145 to $180 a month, which is a big discount over the hourly rate, but it's still a tough ask for a lower wage employee. Or they can try to find free street parking and do the 75-minute shuffle, or cycle their cars in our parking lots. And one thing to note about that is that the timed parking on the streets, or these sort of workarounds, are currently seen as free parking, or a way that you can park all day or for a long period without paying. But really, they're not supposed to function that way. You're supposed to use the free period once and then leave. In the code, technically, the free period only applies once a day. It's just that we don't really have any way of enforcing that. So it's not that the city offers free long-term parking everywhere, it's that people have figured out how to game that system because we don't have the technology to prevent it. So yes, it's not gonna be as easy to do that 75-minute shuffle, but we're offering alternatives that are a very good value. Employees who pay for permits will see a huge price reduction. Employees who pay the hourly rates will max out at just $10 a day if they park in a parking garage. So going into, and I'm going to skip ahead again, I apologize, a little bit more detail about the financials of both the managed parking budget proposal and the alternative proposal. So again, a reminder that without any changes, we're looking at a $3.8 million deficit with a requirement for the general fund to transfer at least $2.7 million to the fund. So under the managed parking proposal, we'd expect to run a surplus of about $400,000 without the general fund transfer, or about $900,000 if that transfer is included, which would allow us to replenish our reserves and prepare us to take on some of those bigger deferred capital expenses next year. And again, these are pretty conservative revenue estimates. So under the alternative proposal, which again is what we're proposing, that you as the city council budget for the coming year, we'd still end up running a deficit of nearly $790,000, which would diminish our total reserves to just about $400,000. But again, giving us some additional time to work out the managed parking solution. So again, this would just be a one-year option. Looking a little more closely at changes to our base budget in revenues, you see a decrease in the hourly revenues from base, but an increase from the no change scenario. Again, that's because for FY25, we'd actually assumed no free period, so our proposal isn't quite that drastic, but you also have the addition of $2.5 million in new street parking revenue. The PBIA would go up $30,000 from status quo, but again, that's still lower than the base. The number assumed a larger PBIA adjustment for this year. And then you see the big drop in monthly parking. So this represents the revenue that we would lose by reducing the cost of employee parking permits, but that's more than made up for by the other changes to hourly and street parking rates. So for the alternative proposal, hourly revenues drop quite a bit from the base budget down to $6.2 million because we wouldn't be making any changes. Monthly parking would see a modest increase, which we just expect those permits to continue to recover slowly. The PBIA holds steady, and then you see those general fund transfers that we've talked about. So moving on to expenditures, you can see that allocated costs are actually dropping slightly for this year, which is new and exciting. We've seen major increases in those over the past few budget cycles. Credit card fees are way up over base. This is a little bit of an anomaly, I just want to call it out. The major shift to credit cards in the parking lots has caused an increase. In addition to that, we've added online credit card payment options for our customers, which again has also increased credit card use and therefore credit card fees. So there's that change in consumer behavior. But also, we had some sort of a billing issue this past year with a credit card provider. We actually didn't receive any bills for the entirety of FY23, so we didn't have anything to base our projections off of for FY24 and FY25. So we were a bit off, that's why the big jump here. So you can see credit card fees would be a bit lower under the alternative proposal because we wouldn't be processing those extra street parking transactions. You're seeing some modest savings in supplies and services. While a lot of costs are increasing, and we are going to need to replace some of our larger equipment next year, we have found ways to create some savings by bringing our janitorial services in-house after having used contractors for the last several years. And that number goes down a bit under the alternative proposal because, again, we'd save the costs of implementing the street parking. And then again, you see the changes to the capital program that I discussed earlier. So I'm going to go back slightly to that graph, those projected reserves. This is just a revised version of the chart that you saw earlier, this time keeping our fund balance in the black, although not quite reaching our policy reserves target due to the capital backlog we'll need to work through over the next several years. So now moving on to implementation, because I know you're going to have questions, I want to run quickly through some early details of how we would approach these changes. So this is obviously a very big subject. It could be its own presentation, so I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but I will give you an overview. So first off, let's take a look at what our timeline would look like. The blue is what's already underway, and then the green would be an outline of where we go from here, although the actual schedule is going to depend largely on what you decide here today. So on April 30th, again, we visited the Finance Committee and proposed both of these solutions, which they recommended that be forwarded to you. Here we are today on May 15th for your review, and then it will proceed through the budget process until adoption on June 11th of whatever solution is pursued. So then again, depending on what you recommend, that will sort of determine what the rest of the implementation schedule looks like. So if and when we do pursue Price Street parking, we are going to need to adopt an ordinance to do that. So the earliest we'd be looking at doing that is probably late June or early July, with July 23rd being the earliest first reading at City Council, and July 30th being the earliest second reading. Again, all of this timing will be dependent. And then our hybrid proposal would be to begin to roll out the changes in the parking lots and garages in Q2 or Q3 of next year, so between October and March, with implementation of managed street parking delayed until Q3 or Q4, so further towards the end of the fiscal year. So next, here's a map of the area where we'd propose to price the street parking. So this is basically identical to the city's designated central business district. With the exception of portions of Delavina Street, it's almost entirely commercial. These aren't really residential streets. And this includes everywhere that's within 1 block of a paid city parking lot. And that part's really important. So it's hard to get people to pay for parking when the parking across the street is free. This is a challenge that we're up against now, so we do think it's important that if we want this to work, we need to include a sufficient area. So moving on to the question of enforcement. We're all aware of the challenges that we've had with parking enforcement staffing over the past few years, and we're very excited that staffing is rebounding strong, and there's been an emphasis on downtown, as you heard from the chief yesterday. So that is very heartening and very encouraging, and we're very pleased with the progress that's been made there. But we really want to make sure that those resources are available for all of the enforcement priorities around the city. So what we'd be proposing to do for Price Street parking would mirror the same system that the waterfront uses today with its pay and display at the beachfront lots. So they have their own staff. In this case, we'd have parking ambassadors patrol the lots and issue fee collection notices rather than citations. So to start with, we'd be looking at enforcing likely between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., although we'll probably end up adjusting that as we tweak the system going forward, and we'd want to, of course, take daylight into consideration for safety reasons. And we understand that there are certainly the possibility of some impacts to other operations in other parts of our city with this sort of plan. So we want to have a robust mitigation strategy in place to help cushion that. So first off, we'd want to continue to offer local incentives, such as the recent Film Festival Pass, which proved to be very popular. We're also considering an Arts and Culture Pass that would allow income-qualified individuals to visit downtown a certain number of times per month to visit libraries, museums, et cetera. And then other types of incentives as we're able to afford them. And that's something that we're going to have to evaluate as we review the kind of revenue levels that we're able to achieve. So we get a lot of questions about whether we could offer something like the annual pass that the waterfront does. But frankly, we probably couldn't afford that initially. But depending on how much revenue we're seeing, we would like to be able to develop other options. So then there's the question of how this would affect parking in the residential areas. So fortunately, the entire downtown between the freeway and Olive Street is already designated for permit parking. And while not every street has permit restrictions currently, we do already have that system and that structure in place to deal with the impacts of non-residential parking congestion in those areas. So for customers who live on or near a Price parking block who already get resident permits, nothing's going to change. So your permit will exempt you from having to pay pay within 3 blocks of your home. For the residents who don't yet have permit parking on their blocks, but they want to get it in order to try to prevent, let's say, employees from parking further out, we'd be implementing an expedited request process to have permit parking signs placed, and we'd also offer to waive the permit fees for new residential customers for the first 2 years to cushion that impact. So then finally moving on to evaluation. Even though this strategy is standard practice in lots of cities all over the country, it's new for us here in Santa Barbara, and we need to be flexible and adaptable in how we implemented it. So if it's not working, we'd want to be able to make adjustments quickly. We'd monitor revenues closely, which we already do in our parking lots, both daily and monthly. We'd keep a close eye on occupancy, again, both in our parking lots, but also on the streets, which is something that LPR can make easier for us, so that we could adjust fees if occupancy was consistently high or consistently low in a certain area. And we can proactively identify areas where maybe residents are seeing an impact or parking congestion is increased, so that we can address those proactively. So overall, this is going to be an iterative process. It's going to be a learning process, but we're fortunate in that we have lots of industry best practices and other model cities that we can follow. So that's the end of my presentation right now. Happy to take all of your questions. Again, I have Ed France here with me, as well as Megan Salas, who has all of the numbers for everything in the world. So hopefully we can answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, very good. So we'll come back to council for questions. Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. First, I really want to acknowledge what's clearly taken a tremendous amount of staff, brain power, time, and effort. No question. This is very detail-oriented. I do have several questions. The first one is, what is the history of downtown parking being an enterprise fund? Does it still make sense for it to be an enterprise fund? I won't do that as a leading question. I don't think it makes sense for it to still be an enterprise fund. Would it make more sense if it could collect funds from, say, UUT, or Measure B for Clean Creeks, or Measure C for infrastructure, or other programs for the ambassadors? So it's a genuine question about, why is this an enterprise fund, and does it still make sense?
Sure, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Snedden. I'll defer the part of your question about what other funding sources might be available to Mr. DeMartini. But as to the history of downtown parking, and perhaps Mayor Rouse will correct me on some of this because I know that he's an expert. But as I mentioned, the system originally came to be, I believe, in the late 60s when there were parking sort of districts established in order to develop the parking lots, and then subsequent parking lot development took place largely through the RDA and through those funds. And so, that's one of the things that has contributed to the difficulties that we faced, is that when the RDA dissolved, we sort of lost what we had previously had as a source of funding for some of our capital or for some of our facilities. So, you're probably familiar with the history of the PBI at this point, but, the idea was to develop this benefit assessment district downtown, whereby all the businesses could collectively fund a public parking supply in order to compete with, of course, La Cumbre Plaza, which offered free parking at the time, and that was a big draw. Of course, La Cumbre Plaza still offers free parking, but like a lot of malls around the country, they have difficulties there, just like, similar to what we're facing in downtown. So the history of downtown parking as sort of a community benefit and as something that is subsidized by both the businesses downtown and the people who actually use it is fairly long. I don't know exactly when the decision was made that it would be an enterprise fund, but perhaps Mr. DeMartini has other history on that.
Councilmember Snedden, I can just add a few comments, which is, I don't have the date of which the enterprise fund was established. It's been quite a long time, though. And we do treat it like an enterprise fund, so all of the revenues that it generates are to fund its current operations and its capital investment. However, it doesn't have the same restrictions as many of our other enterprises. For example, water and wastewater have much stronger restrictions about the rate revenue from the water and the wastewater bills. This fund doesn't have as many restrictions, so we treat it as an enterprise, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Other revenue sources that could fund the operation in its capital are general fund, so taxpayer dollars could fund the operation. Also, Measure C is a funding source that could potentially be used for its capital investment, which is why that is one of the options in the proposal that is before you today.
Thank you, and I guess really the question about if it still makes sense, and I'm looking at some of these things like the waterfront shuttle, which should be funded, but now it's at zero, or New Beginnings program could be funded from other sources as that relates to homeless initiatives. The plaza maintenance, that also seems to me like a benefit to all residents and not necessarily just people using the parking lots. And I just continue to really have that question about if it's not a true enterprise fund and we treat it as if it is, I'll just say it doesn't make sense to me that we say this fund is structurally deficit and so we don't have money for a shuttle, or we don't have money to keep it clean downtown, or we don't have money for sort of basic services downtown because this fund isn't making its own money. If you have a comment on that.
So Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, to some of the items that you touched on initially, such as with New Beginnings or the ambassadors, I actually do want to point out that those are general funded right now. So we call those pass-throughs. The general fund for crossing guards, or 50% of our cost of crossing guards, for the New Beginnings Counseling Center, the support that we give to the Safe Parking Program, for the downtown organization's annual marketing contract, and for the ambassador program. We receive transfers from the general fund that we then pay out to manage those contracts. So it's not so much something that supports our operation, it just supports those specific programs and those agreements that we have with service providers. So that is something that is already in place. As to the larger question, that's really a policy question. I'll note that, putting my transportation planning hat on, that the city has a lot of climate policies and climate goals. It has a lot of adopted circulation element policies and transportation-related policies that are intended to discourage, particularly employees, from driving and encourage the use of other alternative transportation options, and to reduce what is our largest source of emissions in the city. And so having people who don't use the parking pay for the parking is sort of counter to those goals. So the best practice for the industry is to have the people who use the service bear the cost for the service, and to let people who don't use the service get things a little bit cheaper. So.
I think I can help clarify a little bit of this too, because in the initial formation of the parking districts, they were parking districts that were also assessment districts before the PBA was formed. Okay, and that may be how it's never been a legal definition of an enterprise fund. We've always kind of considered it that way. But I remember we were frustrated back in the day when we were actually running very robust surpluses, and all of a sudden they would just disappear. That's how we started doing the plaza maintenance back in the day, because that was a park and rec program. That's when we did the MTD Crosstown Shuttle. All those things came out of parking. The Lot 6 was taxed with $350,000 a year in mitigation funds for whatever traffic trips it supposedly caused. So it never has functioned that way. And then in later years, we were using some RDA residual funds to help fund capital improvements to the thing, because it is in fact an asset, a capital asset. So I think the bottom line is, Ms. Sneddon, I don't think we really have to worry about trying to redefine it. I think I'm pretty sure we can be whatever it wants, because that's the way we've always treated it. And so it's always had a mixture of both inputs and outputs from all the different funds that have gone into it.
Well, thank you, Mayor Rouse, and that actually confirms my impression that if funds are flowing in and out, and if we are funding programs or things, and we'll save this for discussion, but if we are funding things like the plaza or safe parking or new beginnings, that we might want to be considering those with our entirety of general fund considerations of what we're doing for our homeless initiatives or what we're doing for other initiatives, to have it be separated out as a separate fund that we're sort of confirming is not a true enterprise fund, and that funds flow into it, funds flow out of it. I think that's one of my issues with this.
One of the reasons for the definition as well was that it was developed for and by the business communities because of the fear of, as Ms. Clark mentioned, the development of La Cumbre Plaza. So it was to take the parking off of the street, to widen the sidewalks and make it a livable, walkable Santa Barbara. That was designed and talked about back then. But the idea was, how do we support the downtown business corridor, which at the time was the main retail corridor and the main attraction. So it was developed as a public-private partnership with the businesses, which is how we finally got into doing a PBIA, which was, I thought, a really well-spent money by different business entities to pay that nominal fee to help maintain those parking lots. So, and it never really, I mean, it never really subsidized the full free period. That's never really been that way. Not sure even how that got that definition, but.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could just chime in too a little bit, when the RDA first paid for and constructed those, several of the parking lots that are now part of the downtown fund, those parking lots were paid for with RDA funds, and the downtown parking fund managed the parking lots and kept the revenues from the parking lots and managed the parking lots with those funds, but the assets were RDA assets. Then when the RDA dissolved, those assets, like parking lots 2 and 10 and the others, transferred to the city, so they're actually assets of the city, but downtown parking still manages those and keeps the revenue. So it is a little bit mixed up already.
And that does seem to be what causes the structural deficit, that we have these large structures to maintain, and we're expecting parking fees to pay for that.
Correct, right, thank you.
And then, and I'll have more on that in discussion, but what if a person doesn't have a credit card? What happens?
Sure, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, I assume that you're referring to price parking on the street?
Yes.
So we would accept payment in multiple different ways. So we would, of course, encourage people to use mobile apps, which would be available, or a mobile web payment. But if not, we would place small self-serve kiosks on each block where you could pay with cash or credit card.
Okay, so cash would be an option.
Yes.
Would the $10 maximum apply to multiple lots? So I've spent $10 over here, and I'm going over to another lot. Can I hold on to my ticket and use it over there?
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, our policy has always been park once and enjoy it all from there. So, we want to discourage people from driving from parking lot to parking lot. So at least at this point with our technology, we're not able to do that, to know that you've been in one parking lot and then moved over to another one. But that's something we might be able to explore with different technology.
I'm thinking along the lines of, I've gone to 3 different parking lots today myself, and I'm happy to pay it because it goes to the city, but I don't expect that of other people. And just incidentally, right now, I need to charge my EV car, so it's charging and I'm paying for parking. So it's double paying, so it's a sort of a disincentive. But so, okay, we could look at that, but I'm thinking of also people with small children in and out of the car. Sometimes you pull into a lot, your kid is going into one lesson while your other kid is asleep in the car, and now you're paying for that parking. And then if you're going somewhere else, I mean, that is a way of life for several years for many people. So maybe, okay, your answer there. Another question I have is, how would a visitor know from out of town about all the complicated differences between the street parking, the surface lot, the parking lot? And I'll just share, I went to St. Augustine recently, been going there my whole life. I circled for an hour, couldn't find a parking place, and then finally spent my $25 flat rate to park in the parking lot. And I thought, what changed? Like, I've come here every year. I don't know what's happened here. How do I know that the street, I can't park here anymore and that I'm supposed to go over here? So how would a visitor know this sort of complex rate structure for all these different places?
Certainly, that's a great question, Councilmember Sneddon through the mayor. And I just want to point out the example that you cite in St. Augustine is one of the things that we actually are looking to resolve. We don't want you to have to circle around looking for parking. That is the result of parking being priced too low in that case. But there was parking availability in the higher cost parking lot. So that aside, we would have signage available. So we already have signage at the entrances to all of our parking lots that lays out our fees clearly. So we would continue to do that. Really, it's really just two separate fee structures. So there's the parking garages and then there's on-street and in the surface lots. So, again, that would be communicated through signage. I think at this point, people have gotten used to, particularly people who are coming from larger cities are used to the costs that are associated with street parking, so.
If I could add, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Sneddon, if you look at sort of what you'd call the industry norms now, and you look at comparative cities like Monterey or Sacramento, in addition to being able to see rates, and rates are increasingly dynamic as a norm to address the issue that you brought up on street parking in St. Augustine, and actually availability in a GIS customer-facing window way is very typical. So right now, I can see pricing and availability on streets or on lots or in garages in Monterey or Sacramento and many other cities.
So while I'm driving around, I look at my GIS and try to figure out I'm very
Well,
cheap, and so I'm never going to St. Augustine again. I'm just telling you that, and I decided that already. It's not worth my $25. And when you look at comparable cities, Goleta has free parking and shops and stores and libraries and all the amenities that I might be looking for. Just personally, I won't pay to go places, and that's my next question, actually. Like, we were at the police station today, and I thought, if I park on the street here in this scenario, am I going to have to pay to go to the Fallen Officers Memorial, or am I going to have to pay to go into the police station to dispute a ticket or to file a report? And along that list too is police station, the library, to pick up my kids from various classes, to attend city hall meetings, free speech events in De La Guerra Plaza. That one really concerns me. Is a person now going to have to pay at a premium to be able to participate in a free speech event, or take public transit that frankly is just not robust enough in our city to get people where they need to go at the times of day they might want to go? So
if I may interrupt, I'm going to ask us all to try to stay with questions now, because we're going to have plenty of, I'm sure we're going to have plenty of
That's a
deliberating.
question. That's a question. It's a genuine question for comment, because I could just make statements about it later, but it's an opportunity for
Okay.
me to see it a different way.
Having a lot of give and take, so.
Sure, Councilmember Sneddon, through the mayor. I would point out that for something like the police department, at least times that I have tried to park over there, it's very difficult to find parking in the vicinity of the police department because it's all parked up. And so, again, that's something that we'd hope to alleviate. There would be a small charge, depending on how long you were staying, if you wanted to have the closer street parking, although, again, I would note that the police station will hopefully sooner than later be moving to the Coda lot, which is just 1 block away from City Lot 10, which would still offer an hour of free parking. So, we are still maintaining those free options in the parking garages where there's more capacity so that we can alleviate some of the congestion and the crowding that you see in the other areas.
Thank you. And then for the locals pass, or you had that consideration, would it just be like, could there be a locals only pass sort of year round, or would there be a way to look at that?
Sure, Councilmember Sneddon, through the mayor, we already have a locals weekender pass that allows unlimited parking on the weekends for $100 for 6 months. So we haven't had a whole lot of uptake on that, but generally when people find out about it, they react very positively to that. So that's certainly an incentive that we would continue to offer. And as I noted, that's something that we'd be looking at looking more deeply into the sorts of incentives that we could offer for locals. If this ends up being a robust enough revenue source, then hopefully we could offer differential rates for residents if the technology, again, enables that. But that's something that we have to experiment with going forward.
Thanks. And then last question on slide 25, is that Ginger or moped, is that considered sidewalk-friendly transport?
Yeah, Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Stedden. So these actually, this is one option that we've looked into. We haven't settled necessarily on anything, but this is something that several other cities actually do use for parking enforcement. And there are ones that are specially built and equipped with license plate recognition cameras for parking enforcement. So yes, I believe that those are considered something that's sidewalk friendly. So
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll sneak in a comment because I've forgotten in the couple presentations I've seen before this, and I feel bad about that. But this presentation that I've seen a couple times is by far the best presentation I've seen in parking since I've sat up here. It walks you through the choices. It shows them on paper. I'll niggle it to death and go down the rabbit hole, but the structure of what you put in front of us is really, really good, and I just wanted to thank you for that. I should have sent an email a couple times ago. So. PBIA, do we collect that on a calendar year or a fiscal year basis?
Councilmember Jordan, it's assessed on a fiscal year basis. In fact, the next assessment will be coming to you next month, I believe, for renewal, as it does every year, and it's billed quarterly.
And is that the result that you were talking about before, which is 170,000 out of 830? It's about 20%, a little over 20% not being collected. Is that pretty common historically?
So Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Jordan, typically this is higher than we have seen in the past. Part of that may be due to a switch to a new billing system that we have used. Beyond that, it's honestly not entirely clear. When we go over the list of delinquencies, it's a lot of large businesses, as a matter of fact. Less so the smaller local businesses. But that is, in this case, that's a little bit anomalous, but one of the challenges with PBIA is that it's self-reported. So the assessee gets a worksheet that they fill out to claim whether it's their gross receipts, their square footage, things like that. We have not a whole lot of ways to verify that, so it's just a challenging administrative process.
And so if someone was to come up with the crazy idea just to stop being frustrated with a PBIA that's only funding, whatever your number was, 13% or something of the total thing, and is suffering from, let's say, 15 to 20+% delinquencies every year, you could come up with a number to fold into the rest of your bad numbers that the parking system would have to recover to replace that if it just went away and it was all based on parking without the PBA, right?
Sure. Councilmember Jordan, through the mayor. We could look at alternatives to the PBIA. That's something that we actually started doing with a consultant back before the pandemic, but then we placed that on hold just because of all of the changes that downtown is currently undergoing. And that consultant actually did, in their initial recommendations to us, recommend moving to a different system, either a different type of assessment or priced on street parking was a big one. Again, that's something that most other cities do that we don't have as a revenue source. Or eliminating the free period entirely and moving to a validation system where businesses, instead of paying PBIA, they would decide whether or not and how much they wanted to validate, and then we would bill them for those fees. So that parking does not magically become free, but the business would be taking it on in a different way.
And in the scheme of things, right, just make up the numbers, $10 million in revenues, less than $1 million potentially if everybody paid their PBIA. It's a pretty small percentage of, if you have to start manipulating where you're getting your revenue, you're really not chasing a big chunk of your revenue. It's a pretty small amount of your revenue to have to blend into the other $9 million, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, I believe so. So that percentage has remained relatively unchanged. That assessment has remained at about $1 million, aside from the COVID years, basically since the current boundaries were established.
Okay. And then in all your scenarios regarding your budget, in any one of the scenarios, the current, choice, alternative, and your relationship to Measure C, are any of those still funding your maintenance and capital costs with revenue-generated money and not Measure C money?
So yes, Councilmember Jordan, through the mayor, the proposal for the Measure C transfer and the general fund transfer, the general fund transfer would be limited to what we spend on our plaza activities, and then for capital, that would be limited to capital improvement projects. So the day-to-day maintenance and upkeep of the parking garages would remain an operating expense from the parking revenues.
Do you know how much that is? Ballpark figure?
I don't know. Ballpark.
Millions or a million or?
So I would estimate.
Yeah, what I'm looking for is in my world, my phrase is potentially Measure C qualifying dollars that aren't being funded by Measure C now in any one of your budget scenarios. And what?
Sure. So if I had to guess, I would put that at probably around $3 to $4 million a year.
And then I'm starting not to see any enforcement process on the street that doesn't involve people. And that's correct, right? There is, even if you're using an app, somebody's looking at, you're just using the app to project how many hours or minutes you're going to stay there. And then whether you're there or not, somebody's going to be looking at their version of the app to see that that car's still there or not, right?
That's correct, yes. So I believe the vehicle code requires that a citation, or if a citation is issued, it has to be actually placed on the vehicle. In certain other states, you can do that by mail or remotely, but you'll always need somebody here to actually place that notice.
Okay, and then can you further explain the nuts and bolts of what's the difference between a fee collection notice and a citation? So I'll just tell you what I think I know. If I get a citation, I don't get to delay that any farther than my next California vehicle registration notice. What's the difference there between that and a fee collection notice?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So initially, they are different. So it's, initially when it's issued, and again, this is how it works at the waterfront. You're paying the fee, it's going to the waterfront department, you have a certain number of days to pay it. If you don't pay it within those days, it does roll over and become a parking citation at that point. And then it goes on to, eventually you'll have to pay it if you want to renew your registration.
Doesn't become an uncollected, like PBIA, resource-heavy problem. There is a method to.
Yes,
to
there
stop
is.
that.
And
Okay.
the city has existing systems in place that already handle that process.
And the benefit to us doing that on the front loading is that we don't have to have a sworn police officer issuing the citation, right? We can just have a guy
Yeah,
on the
we would
street.
not have to have a parking enforcement officer or a police officer doing that. We'd be able to do it with existing staff.
Okay. And then, Keith, or I think either you or Cliff, kind of my general question is on just big picture overall Measure C funds, the bucket of Measure C that's budgeted every year for whatever uses they are. How much of that money historically doesn't get spent by the end of the year for whatever reason? The projects don't get off the ground, there's too many projects for available contractors, but what do we, if not roll over, just have unused at the end of the year historically in that bucket?
Councilmember Jordan, thank you so much for that question. It is common that the Measure C fund has quite a lot of money in it at one point in time, and that there are a number of reasons why that occurs, which is planned and expected. First is that whenever we let out a construction contract, we have to have all of that money available and appropriated at the time we let out the contract. And that contract may go 2 to 3 years or even longer sometimes. And so it's common that you might have a contract for $5 million, you spend $1 million in the first year, and then you have $4 million sitting there collecting interest. We invest that money while we have it, right? And then it will be spent over time. And so as the cycle of capital projects comes and goes, we will always have a pot of money in there. What also has occurred over the past couple of years with sort of delays with staffing levels that we've had a higher vacancy rate than normal over the past couple of years. We have quite a lot of capital projects in the queue, and so there have been some project delays. I will say, so some projects and programs are better at spending down their funds more quickly than others. For example, the paving program has been very successful on spending down their money as they get it each year. Another part of your question, which I feel compelled to respond to, is at this point in time for what's planned for fiscal year 2025, all of the projected revenue coming in for Measure C is already programmed, okay? And so if a decision is made by council to have Measure C fund these capital projects that are before you today for downtown parking, we would effectively budget for more expenditures than we have revenues. Now, it's not really a cash flow issue because we have cash in the fund, as I just explained previously. However, that's not a really good practice. We really shouldn't be budgeting to spend more than the money that comes in that given year.
Is there an answer that gets to where I'm going with that involves not multi-year projects, but just involves a one-time, one-month project, a bunch of those, that doesn't get accomplished in a fiscal year, and those monies are left over at the end of the year, but then though, to do that project the next year, you're just using next year's accumulated Measure C, and that money was just kind of there and then not there anymore. Do you follow what I'm saying? So it's not involved with your multi-year planning or an obligation up front. It's just simply stuff that we, in my words, over-project that we'll be able to accomplish, and we just don't, and that's okay. It becomes a part of next year's $25 or $30 million of Measure C, right?
Councilmember Jordan, I think I do understand your question, and so what we do at the staff level is, right now it's annually in preparation for the budget process. We go through every single project that has received appropriation from Measure C and General Fund. It's also done in the enterprises, but we look holistically at Measure C. And we evaluate each and every one of them. Are they on track? Are they going to come in under budget? Are they going to come in over budget? What's the timing? And if we have an opportunity to deappropriate, to reduce the funding on some of those because of delays, or the project scope has changed, or there could be a whole host of reasons, we take those actions. And what's actually coming to council next week on Tuesday as part of the Q3 report is multiple Measure C funded projects we are recommending deappropriating some funds in them because of those changes, which frees up money to be appropriated in other projects.
Okay, fair enough. I like that. Then, thank you. Then, Sarah, do we still, or would we still continue to plan on free use in the Amtrak lot for people who show a ticket that they left town, came back to town? Is that still a program we do, and would we still be continuing that in the future?
Sure. So, Councilmember Jordan, it's not free, but it is a discounted rate.
Okay.
That is at $10. Yeah, that's at $10 a day now if you have the Amtrak ticket. And I would note that we are proposing to include the depot lot as a garage as opposed to surface lot because of that special use. And you've got the longer term parking there with the train passengers.
Okay, then my last question, I'm sure whatever we decide today, I mean, my perception is kind of we're setting up surface streets as what you'd call premium, and lots as not quite premium, and garages as we want y'all to park in the garage. And if the pricing focuses on that, I'm sure immediately what we're going to hear about is my mom, like, so my mom's not alive, but my mom's not handicapped, but she is challenged to walk far. And that demographic, just using as an example, how are we going to accommodate our pricing to recognize that some people are parking in our premium spots because they need to physically be close to where they're going, but they don't, the level of their accessibility is not rising to the structured level of a handicap placard. It's just they're old or they can't walk well or whatever it is. How are we going to respond to that?
Certainly. Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Jordan, that is also a great question. So as you've noted, somebody who has a valid disability parking placard or license plate is exempt from paying the fees on the streets. So that would, in theory, create actually more parking availability that is closer, particularly for those individuals. For somebody who is just, sort of mobility limited but hasn't pursued a disabled parking placard, we would continue to offer the disabled parking validation, which again is twice the free period in the parking lots. So that would continue to remain an option, and that's also one of the things that we could look at as an opportunity for an incentive type program or a special type parking pass program.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, staff, for a lot of information. It's no easy task before us today, so I'll get right to it. I'm going to ask some questions, just ideas that are out there. So the first one is, so down at the waterfront with cruise ships, we charge a $10 per person manifest, regardless of whether or not they get off the cruise ship and come in here. And with the garages downtown, hotels downtown frequently use our garages for overnight guest parking. So where I'm going with this is, can we charge hotels a fee per room per night to try to generate revenue? I'm sorry I didn't ask that beforehand because it just came to me this morning.
Sure, and thank you, Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor, for that creative idea. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry, I don't know how a fee like that would work. Maybe Mr. DiMartini would have.
And there, just a slight context, one of the concerns I have with dropping the fee from 33 to 10 is then it opens it up to the hotels just to tell everyone to park in our parking garages for $10 a night. Whereas right now they're already doing that, and so if they're doing that, it's $33 a night. So you'd have hotels lowering their costs when we're facing a deficit. So if we were to do something like what we do with cruise ships, at least we'd be covering some cost, even if it's a minimal cost of $5 per room for a downtown hotel.
Councilmember Freeman, it's a very creative idea, and I think it's worth exploring. And what comes to my mind would be a similar structure like the T-bid potentially. So it would be like a special assessment on people staying at a hotel, which has to go through a council approval process, and there's a report that has to be done. So it might mirror closely to the T-bid annual process.
Yeah, it's just an idea that came to me. I figured I'd throw it out today. So I figured we'd have to look into it more. Another question, and I did ask to staff to look into it, so I just want to put it out there. If we went with the staff proposal, and part of that proposal, the original proposal, is to lower some of the fees from 3 to 2 in the overnight, but it's also to reduce the free time in the garages from 75 to 60, and the surface to 15 minutes. What would happen if we increased the garages to 90 minutes so that we're giving something back to the public and hopefully getting people to stay longer?
Certainly, thank you, Councilmember Friedman. I'm going to ask Megan Salas to come up and address that because I know that she has absolutely run those numbers.
Sorry. Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor. So every 15 minutes of subsidized period in the garages is valued at about $600,000 in revenue. So you'd be looking at about 1.2 million by going from 60 minutes to 90 minutes of subsidized period. You would also need to then look at the behavior impact of that. One of the goals of this program is to encourage people to stay downtown longer and to not rush to try to beat that free period. By extending it to 90 minutes, you may find more people who are encouraged to try to get in and out under that 90 minutes rather than spending more time downtown.
But they also might try to get out in 59 minutes rather than the 90, correct? So, okay. That's a perfect segue to another question. Have we run any numbers on, or do we even have an ability to model what the increase in pricing does or the decrease in free time does to people coming downtown?
Councilmember Friedman through the mayor. So we did build an impact into our revenue projections. The impact that I built in is a 25% decrease in occupancy per rate of duration in our surface lots and an increase of 10% occupancy per rate of duration in the garages. With no real street data, it's a little harder to factor that in, but we did base our numbers off of the consultant's initial numbers for street revenue, and Mr. France can also elaborate on that as well.
And Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Frieden, if I could add to that, I will say that it's important to note that overall, we have much more capacity in our garages than lots. So when we talk about percentages, they're relative in terms of sort of number of spots, right? We have twice as many spaces in our garages versus lots. That's where the capacity is. That's where we want to encourage people, as Councilmember Jordan noted. Also, in terms of the incentive, one of the things that you'll see in the shift for the lots is by half hour. So sometimes you're wanting to get in right by the wire, and then you pay that first full hour. By being able to make that incremental, it reduces that sting and really the value of one's time when you're not sort of in a gamified kind of parking mindset. Helps people ease into a longer stay. So note that that is a benefit of this proposal as well.
So the lots is the half hour, so to your point. And did you say there's a 25% decrease in duration in the surface lots? And what do you, can you explain what you mean decrease in duration?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we came to the revenue projections here is by looking at the number of people who left during each duration period. So during every who stayed for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, and so on throughout the day, and used that to generate the revenue projections. So we applied the percentage impacts against those. So for each duration period, applied the impact percentages.
So the durations are 15-minute increments?
Yes.
Increments? And so it was a 10% increase in duration in the garages?
10% for each of those duration periods. So the number of people who stayed for each of those duration periods in garages, and a negative 25% for each of those duration periods in the surface lots.
Perfect. And then, so I'm kind of all over the map of questions here. So the meters on the street would cost 1.5 million, as I understand it, to install. I think that was in one of the slides.
Sorry, Councilmember Friedman through the mayor. It would be about around $1 million for the first to install the meters and get all of the licensing, all the programs that we would need to get it running. Yeah.
And two questions. One, ADA accessibility with those, I think that might have been answered in the previous question, but just how do we address that? And then also, are there concerns about technology and just it not rolling out smoothly, which is known to happen?
Certainly, Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor. As I noted earlier, again, per the state law, people with valid disabled parking placards or license plates park for free on the street, so they're exempt from any time restrictions currently and any fees that are assessed on the street. So that would continue, that would apply for our city. So, in theory, there would actually be more spaces available, and those would be free to people with disabilities for the street parking. And then remind me what the other part of your question was. I apologize.
It was technology, just,
Yes.
have the systems we're using been implemented in other areas, or have we implemented them maybe in the waterfront before, so we're familiar with the technology?
Sure, Councilmember Friedman. So we wouldn't necessarily be using the exact technology that we have right now. Waterfront is also considering a transition from pay and display, where you put the little ticket on your windshield, to a pay by plate, which means you don't have to go back and forth to your car, which people generally prefer. So we would likely coordinate with them. However, this technology at this point in the parking industry is very well established. It's the standard, really. So there is a number of different, very well-established vendors, such as, again, the Waterfront uses T2. That's a very common and popular system. We use Ski Data in our parking lots, and that is another vendor that we could consider. But then there's also some newer players that have come to market more recently. So there really are a wide variety of options, and they are well used by other cities. So it's always a concern. Obviously, you're always going to have some glitches when you roll out new technology. But again, these are systems that we're not on the leading edge of.
Okay, so they've been tested. Something you said, with ADA, proper ADA placards, there's no time limits. Is that per day, or is there still the overall 72-hour that everybody has to apply for?
The 72-hour does still apply, but even today, like a 15-minute space or a 90-minute space, you are exempt if you have a disabled parking placard or license plate.
So that kind of gets me to my next question, because this has come up. If State Street was reopened one way, either partially or all the way, with one lane of traffic, is there enough room to add parking with meters on State Street in some locations?
Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor, that is something we would have to take a closer look at in the design, and it's also something that would involve some policy decisions. When we've looked at sort of sketches to that effect, the amount of parking that there's actually space for varies considerably depending on, whether you wanted to retain the outdoor dining facilities on the street, things like that. But I would also note that, our problem in downtown at this point isn't that there's not enough parking. So, we have plenty of capacity in our parking system. We just need to distribute the people better across it, so.
Just wanted to ask, because it's been out there. So this one I did ask at Finance, since when the decision was made by the council to lower the $5, it was originally recommended for $5 to charge for the parklets on State, and we ended up going with $2. What is the difference in the cost of that? And I have a specific question that I'm going to ask on it. And I'll just ask the question is, can we revisit that since we're in a deficit?
Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor, I believe at the time we estimated that would cost about $400,000. So initially, we had hoped to bring in under the rate structure approximately $600,000, and now we're coming in around $250,000 a year. As to the question of whether that could be revisited, that again would be a question for this council.
Thank you. And then I think you've already answered the question about a residential, could we do a residential parking permit program? Because there are residents downtown, and we are trying to get more cars in the garages. So could we do a limited, if you live in the downtown area and you paid a certain fee, $100 a month or whatever, I'm just throwing a number out there, could we actually do residential parking permits?
Certainly. So, Councilmember Friedman, through the mayor, so two different things here and two different ways to accommodate those residents. First, as I noted in the proposal, we already have resident permit parking on the street. So anybody who lives in the downtown area is already eligible to get a parking permit to allow them to park on the street that would, in this case, exempt them from priced street parking. Now, we also already offer permits, we call them 24/7 permits, in our parking garages, in two of them, so in the Granada garage and in the Ortega garage, for people who live downtown, but maybe they don't have parking on site or they're not eligible for street parking. And so they can purchase permits through us to leave their vehicles in the garage. So that's something, right now they run $150 a month. We would also propose to cut those in half, again, down to $125 a month. But those are programs that already exist.
Okay, so we could continue to do those. Okay, just a few more questions. Going back to the PBIA and the 170,000 that we weren't able to collect, I think I understand why, but why aren't we able to collect it if we do we know who those are from? And then the other aspect is, what mechanisms would we have to collect it, like liens on their property or something, rather than just letting it go? Because the way I take it is we're just letting it go. But is there a way to collect it or be a little more heavy-handed and say pay up?
Councilmember Friedman, the PBIA assessment is non-regulatory, so we have very little ability of compelling payment. We have people on staff that call and send letters. We also are using our Avenue consultants that run our new business tax certificate software portal that people are using to file for their business tax certificate as well. They also have customer service representatives that call and try to compel payment. Really, our last resort is to send the case to collections. And sending it to collections requires a pretty hefty collection fee that the collection agency will keep if they are successful in doing so.
Thank you. Just two more questions. So 2 years ago, we raised the parking rates from $1.50 to $2.50, and that was the right thing to do. They hadn't been raised in 16 years. And then the year later, we raised it 50 cents. Have we been able to collect any data on the impacts of the numbers of cars coming in? So when it went from 150 to 250, did the number of cars increase, decrease, remain the same, and then the same for the other 50-cent increase?
Sure, Councilmember Friedman. I'll qualify this with, it's a little bit difficult to tell because these fee increases coincided with COVID and recovery from COVID. So, comparing year over year is not always an apples to apples comparison. I will say that for the first year of the fee increase, we noticed a small decrease, not too substantial, but we didn't see major shifts in parking behavior. For the second increase, the second increase, so the one that happened at the beginning of this fiscal year, up to $3 an hour, we saw a little bit of a bigger impact. Part of that, has coincided with, again, the street parking availability and how that shifts people's behavior. So, it's fairly safe to assume at this point that we're sort of at a point of diminishing returns in terms of just adding additional fee increases on top of that. But I will take a moment to note that, in comparison to other cities, while our streets, for example, are currently free, and so going to paid is obviously a big change. It still remains very comparable, if not on the lower end of other cities where our rates are set. So.
And just to clarify, I wasn't looking to raise it to 350 or 4. I was actually interested because part of your proposal is to reduce it from 3 to 2 at the end, and if any of the data showed that might actually help if we had any verifiable on it. So I was not advocating to go higher. And my last question, the only reason I even bring this up is I noticed it in slide 11. If you could pull it up just quickly. I suspect I know what the answer will be, but I wanted to ask it. So one of the, so right there on the third from the bottom, Promenade, it says no changes, no changes, no changes. There is considerable in the community, we get emails all the time from those who say if you open up the street, it will increase, it'll solve the problem, or not solve it, but it'll increase circulation and whatnot, and lead to more people parking downtown. Do we have any estimation of that? And the reason I bring it up is because it says no changes on there, and it's such a hot button topic depending on which side you're on. Is there any evidence either way of if we were to make a change, either to partially reopen or fully reopen, that it might impact the numbers positively or negatively?
Sure, Councilmember Friedman. Just a point of clarification where it says no changes here, that's referring to no changes to the amount that we are programming to spend on the promenade. I apologize, this chart used to be a bit bigger. It used to have some other comparisons on it, but we cut it back where we made adjustments to the services that we were providing on the promenade. So, that sort of explains that. As to the question of whether changing circulation patterns downtown, say by returning traffic in some capacity to State Street, I think that it would be very difficult to know, just because we have so many forces, so many changes that happened all at once in terms of, COVID and that coinciding with the promenade, as well as the other vacancies downtown. I think it would be difficult to sort of untangle it, because the situation that we're in right now is not necessarily comparable to where we were before the pandemic. There have been durable changes, particularly to patterns of working from home. And we see that borne out in our parking occupancy, where our weekday occupancy remains considerably lower than it was before the pandemic. And that was, largely a commuter type occupancy. Whereas we still see, the sort of nightlife lots, the lots still fill up when there are shows downtown. They still, Lot 11 is still packed on the weekends. The Depot lot is still packed on the weekends. People are still coming downtown for those types of things. But that fundamental shift to working from home means that we're sort of comparing two different universes. As to how those changes might affect our occupancy and use of our parking system, I think that would depend on how much you believe that the ability to drive on State Street is what brings people downtown, and what would change the equation and make somebody come downtown who currently does not come downtown.
Mayor Rouse, I just counsel the council that State Street's not on our agenda, so I understand where Councilmember Friedman was going and asking with respect to the budget, but it is quite theoretical, so I'd caution you just to be careful with the State Street discussion.
Fair enough, and thank you for the answer, and thanks for clarifying the no changes, what that meant. That's all the questions I got.
Ms. Gutierrez.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your work. I've met with you in your department. We've met here at Chambers. I've gone through these slides. I have a couple questions, especially that we're going through budget. So you mentioned capital projects. Do you have a line item of all the capital projects? I know there's a slide here about Measure C, and a time frame of when these capital projects would be done, because it is budget. It's in the budget that you proposed.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Gutierrez. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the slide that outlines it. I apologize. There we go. Okay, so this is the capital that we had planned on doing for this fiscal year. So there is the revenue control system replacement. So that refers to our parking access and revenue control system that we have in all of our lots and garages. So those are the gates, the columns, the ticket columns, all of the back-end computer stuff that you don't see that lives in our office or lives in the kiosks and the point of sale, things like that. All of that is actually past end of life at this point. So our vendor no longer supports those products. We no longer can get software updates. We no longer can purchase parts for those from our vendor. So we have continued to operate this by virtue of the fact that we have a very skilled technician on our staff who thought ahead and basically hoarded parts to be able to repair and replace and keep this stuff up and running. But this is something that we've had to defer now for a few years because of the budget situation. So this would be a high priority project for us, and it's something, fortunately, that the hybrid option does allow us to pursue. And this would also sort of, it dovetails very nicely with a rollout of street parking because we'd be looking at using similar technology in the surface lots and on streets. So, this would get us into that procurement for that technology system that we would be using. The next one is floor and deck repairs. So this is something that we need to, it's something that we used to do regularly for our garages. It's a regular maintenance item to sort of reseal and repair our roof decks so that they don't start leaking and you end up with water intrusion, you end up with damage to the facility and to the concrete. That's something that we're seeing. We're currently working on making those repairs in 2 of our parking lots right now, in the library garage and in the Libero garage. And that's something that we need to get back into a calendar of regularly doing that so that it is less expensive to proactively reseal that and than it is to repair, for example, when pieces of concrete start falling from the ceiling.
When was the last time a repair was done in those garages?
To the roof deck?
Yeah.
So, like I said, they're the ones that are underway right now, which are at the Libero garage and at the library garage. Prior to that, I actually, to the roof decks, I can't recall. It's been several years at this point. We've got the Amtrak building. It says column repair here, but it's sort of a catch-all. So there is a roof repair that's needed. It's not currently leaking, but every 10 years or so, we have a structural assessment done of all of our assets to identify what these needs are. This is one of the things that was identified, is that roof is getting to the point where there's a portion of it that does need to be replaced. So that is that project. Lot 9, this is another thing that was called out in that assessment report, and that is that the archways where you have the wooden railings that look out onto the street need to be reinforced with cable barriers to add a different, to add an extra layer of protection for a vehicle if a vehicle should go through there. The Ray Road project, that's a smaller project. That's something that we've had on the agenda, again, for several years. When we were able to finally fully assume ownership as the city of we call it the Fish Enterprise parking lot. It was an RDA parcel that has now been incorporated into the depot lot. We sort of changed how you enter there, and we moved to add an entrance gate there so that we could fold it into the depot lot. That has been done with sort of a temporary solution. There's like big pots that are along there that don't always look very nice. And so that's something that would be used for. And this is also intended to be in conjunction with the possibility of some changes that Parks would want to make to the existing exit to Montecito Street in order to help protect and preserve the fig tree. So bigger discussion, but yes, all of these projects would be ones, as Mr. Maurer and Mr. DiMartini noted, just because we start a project in 1 year doesn't necessarily mean we finish it in that year. So like the roof deck repairs, for example, that we're doing now, we're largely budgeted for last year, and we're just finishing up the project at this point. But these are all things that we would undertake in the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because, community members will see increase in fees, and then they'll always ask, like, well, where are all these capital projects that they said they were going to build? And so the reason that I asked is for that clarity for the public, that it does take, sometimes we approve and it doesn't start until a year or 2 years, so thank you for that. Let's see, citation fees for parking. Do those fees, does the money does it stay at the police department, or does it go to parking?
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez, through the mayor, those fees do not come to downtown parking. So I believe a large portion of those fees actually goes to the state. What remains goes to the general fund.
So if you don't pay those parking tickets, eventually you're going to have to pay them when you renew your license plate?
Yes, so if we issued the fee collection envelope, again mirroring the waterfront system, we would have a lower collection fee. It wouldn't be as much as you get if you were to get a parking ticket, say for parking in a red zone or something like that. And you would have a period of time to pay that. If you didn't pay the lower fee, then it would roll over and become a parking citation.
And this is a question that I actually thought of on the spot, listening to other of my colleagues. As we're doing policy and we're listening to the different budgets, I realized that we have strong environmental policies, which I think that's what categorizes our city to be so unique and wonderful. But would you say that our environmental policies, it makes it a little bit challenging when we want to be flexible on our rates or, give things for free to the public, especially during making budget decisions? Is that environmental, thinking about the environment, does it also make it a little challenge when it comes to thinking of like the budget here for parking?
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez, while our proposal here is consistent, like I said, with other adopted city policies and with, best practices for transportation management, our primary consideration is just improving the management of parking. We don't want to discourage anybody from coming downtown, whatever mode they choose to use. We want to make it easier for everybody to get downtown. And so, I don't see those two things as in conflict. I think in this case, they actually work very well together to achieve the goals that we're looking for.
Thank you. Let's see. So in the economic forecast form, one of the speakers said that has been very successful in retail, said that in order to make retail successful, we have to make parking easy and free. Santa Barbara, I think, has one of the lowest parking fees than any other city in California, and we have been privileged in many ways. With all the changes that we're going through, how much are we going to invest on these parking meters right up the front? And is it, so I'm seeing how much this department needs to survive. And I'm thinking we're going to have to invest a lot right away. How much are we going to invest right away? And is the department still going to be sustainable? And how is that going to affect people coming downtown? Because I can tell you as a local, we know all the different tricks to not pay. And as a local, that's not going to change. So, but what about for the ones that are coming from the outside? And how do we also encourage locals that normally don't come downtown, now with the increase of fees, to come?
Certainly, and so to your question regarding the investment for the parking meters, I want to first point out that even though we use the term metered parking, we are not proposing to use individual parking meters. That's sort of a more outdated technology. We would be looking at doing pay-on-foot kiosks, so 1 to 2 small little stands that you can go up to and pay at on each block. Again, similar, if you want to see an example, take a look at the waterfront parking lots. They already use that technology. So it would not be individual meters. We are budgeting approximately $1 million for that, but I'll note that the revenue that we're projecting to generate from that investment pays it off within the year. So that's an investment that pays for itself. As to the question of how is this going to change the behavior of people coming downtown? I think that that's a difficult one to answer. This is a change of going from something that has been free or viewed as free for a long time to something that you're going to have to pay a small amount for in some cases, with still, again, the caveat that we are going to continue to offer free parking, period, in the parking garages for those who where that's important. So it's difficult to quantify, but I will note that people's willingness to pay for parking is largely dependent on what they view as the value of the thing that they're going to park for and the service that they're looking for. So, you could ask the theoretical question, would more people go to Disneyland if parking was free? No, nobody cares that it costs like $40 a day to park at Disneyland because it's Disneyland and people want to go there anyway. Obviously this is not Disneyland and it's not going to be Disneyland. But on a smaller scale, you look at different places and, even if you looked out at, let's say the parking lot by Costco out in Goleta, that's obviously free and that gets brought up as sort of something that's comparable quite a lot. But I guess that if they started charging for that parking, people would still go to Costco because people want to go to Costco. And I mean, that's a different use than what we have downtown. I don't think there's anybody who's out there deciding, should I go to Costco or should I go downtown? But it gets to the point of if there's something there that is valuable, people don't have a problem paying for it. Conversely, we've got, malls even here in town and elsewhere all throughout the country, that have fields of free parking and are dying. If it's really just about the free parking, then we wouldn't be in that situation. So, that's a hard question to answer, and I'm sorry I don't have a quantitative answer for it. I can just kind of point you in different directions of different things to look at.
It was exactly kind of what I wanted to hear. Just, I'm a little confused because I've seen these slides over and over. Mr. DeMartini, maybe you can help me. Which is the proposal that I've been talking about? I'm okay with getting Measure C funding to help this department and raising the fees for the lots. I'm not okay with creating this on-street parking fee just because of everything that we're going through right now. So just for clarification, can you tell me which of these proposals is that one?
Councilmember Gutierrez, so just to start, the proposal that is included in the city administrator's recommended budget for fiscal year 2025 is on this table, slide 11. It's the middle column.
Okay.
It's the proposed changes column. And so the city administrator's recommended budget assumes that this proposal is approved. Therefore, the additional revenue from this proposal being implemented, as well as the additional expenditures, are already in the budget. If council chooses to move forward with an alternative proposal or any other change, we would come back to you with adjustments to the revenue lines and the expenditure lines accordingly. And we would do that during budget deliberations would be ideal. That way you can see them and then make sure that that is okay with you. And then we would bring that forward to budget adoption on June 11th.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask, when it comes to trends, either citywide or nationwide, what is the trend of driving in general for the population? Are there more people driving? Are there less people driving? Because I hear that Gen Z is less likely to get their license, so therefore they're less likely to start driving. Obviously, a certain part of the population ages out of driving. So how does that affect us here in the city? Have you looked that up?
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, through the mayor, that's a really interesting question. I'm sorry I don't have firm statistics for you on that today. I will note that as you mentioned, there has been a trend with younger generations where people are getting their driver's licenses later or foregoing driving for a period of time. It remains to be seen how that may continue, but I don't really want to speculate on what the magnitude of those changes might be.
Okay. Yeah, if you can look into that a bit, because I think when you tally up the portion of the population that's of driving age and those that are aging out of driving, it comes close to being almost half the population. So that makes me worried about doing something that's gonna ultimately not be servicing a large portion of our population to begin with. So if you can just look into that. The second thing is, why don't we do a parking validation model?
So that's something that we have looked into, and we actually have some discussions with some of our stakeholders about that. That could be a possibility. It is a more complicated model to administer, and I would note that, again, it's not that validated parking becomes free, it's that that bill gets sent to the business. So in some cases for businesses, that could be a pretty big bill, depending on what they decided. So that's a possibility. It's something that we could look at pursuing. I would know that that represents a pretty significant change, because that would mean eliminating the free period entirely, and so you would have to go to a participating business if you wanted to get that service or to get a free period. So, but that is more of a user pays kind of model.
Gotcha. And how come we don't have like a city-wide parking pass? Why is it so like piecemealing where you have to get a parking pass for the waterfront, you have to get a parking pass for this specific parking location? Why don't we just have a flat fee for the entire city?
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, so a couple of reasons for that. First off, obviously the waterfront and the downtown parking lots are managed separately, although we do cooperate on quite a bit. But secondly, at least speaking for our operation in downtown, is that we determine where to issue parking permits based on demand for the parking lots. So the reason that we don't offer them in most of our surface lots is because we do have high peak occupancy. And because the parking lots were built and are funded by PBA and are intended to primarily serve the customer base, we always want to make sure that we have customer parking available. So we don't offer permits in lots where those permit parkers would displace the short-term parkers. So the reason that we separate ours out is so that we can manage demand at different lots. And we have and continue to at certain times, place permits on sale for a lot where we've got capacity and stop selling permits in lots where we don't have capacity. So it's just a parking management tool.
But I thought we weren't meeting the capacity.
So Councilmember Gutierrez, as I noted in the presentation, we have lots of capacity in our parking garages for the most part. The Libero parking lot does fill up. We offer permits in the basement there because that's just the way the lot is constructed. That's actually like a private assigned space. Those are the most expensive permits that we offer. That's the only place that we do that. Our other parking garages, we do have permit availability in because we've got plenty of capacity. Our surface lots, and this is a part of what the proposed changes are designed to address, like I mentioned, those are more popular and they do fill up. In Lot 4, we see the Core Power yoga spikes. You can tell when there's yoga classes looking at our occupancy data. When there are shows at Soho, Lot 11 just all the time is full in the evenings and especially on the weekends. So those are lots where, because we do reach capacity, we don't offer parking permits.
Okay. What are some other ways that we could essentially pay for the maintenance of the city parking lots without having to rely on individuals paying? Essentially, is this something that could be a ballot measure where there's a new tax introduced where the revenue from that tax just goes to parking, so that way nobody has to pay theoretically? We're still paying for it because we're being taxed, but there's no need for having to pay individually?
Yeah, I'm going to hand that question over to Mr. Diamartini, but before I do, I just want to note that having price parking is not only a financial benefit to the city in terms of offsetting the cost of owning those assets, but it's also a tool for managing parking demand. So, what we have observed in the past, where there are times where we have to have the gates up because, there's some work going on or something like that, is, for example, all the parking lots, the surface lots will fill up first thing in the morning, and then there's no place for customers to park. And the whole point of the system is to make it easy for people to access downtown. So, where you're pricing it too low, you're not going to have availability, which is what we see on the streets right now. So I'll let Mr. DiMartini address the question about other options.
Councilmember Gutierrez, yes, there are probably multiple options that the council could consider for generating revenue for downtown parking operations that could be considered a tax or like a special assessment, sales tax, a parcel tax. There's other types of taxes that we currently collect that could be considered, so an adjustment to the current rate. All taxes require voter approval. It's also important to note that if a tax were to be used specifically for downtown parking or parking operation, that's considered a special use, a special purpose tax, and so there's a higher voter approval threshold, which would be 2/3, which is different than a general purpose tax that can be used for general governmental purposes. That only requires a simple majority. So that is one consideration for council.
Okay. Have we thought about selling one of the lots and using the revenue from that sale to fund the rest of the lots?
Yes, Councilmember Gutierrez, to the mayor, that is something that we have thought about. When we've run the numbers in the past, first off, as you're aware, there are some pretty tricky rules in terms of how the city can dispose of property. If we were to do that, it ends up being basically a one-year solution. And then, we are looking at future years, and we have basically most of the same costs, but now we're losing the revenue that we got from that parking lot. So one of the things that makes it a little bit complicated for us is that we have this sort of marginal cost situation where the cost of adding an additional parking lot to our sort of management portfolio is actually relatively low compared to what the cost of operating that parking lot is. It's more the fact that we have a system, and we have to staff it, and we have to staff it, we staff 18 hours a day, 361 days a year. That, and we support the city with overhead costs. We have to insure these facilities, all those different things. That's really where kind of the bulk of our cost is, as opposed to just the addition or subtraction of one specific lot, although obviously over the long term, there would be some capital savings.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only 2 questions from me. Appreciate all the thoughtful, detailed questions from my colleagues. So first, to our downtown parking staff, when this idea was sort of in its infancy, I know this has been a very long time coming, but one of the things that I heard a number of times was that our sort of analogous city or sister city of San Luis Obispo was undertaking the same effort to increase the cost of parking, to do paid parking on street. Like they were doing it. San Luis Obispo, in a lot of ways, is a city we want to emulate vis-a-vis their downtown. Their downtown seems to be thriving. Last night, the San Luis Obispo City Council undid the changes to increase the costs of downtown parking and to put parking on the street. And from what I read, admittedly, just a couple of articles, I didn't watch their hearing, it had to do with the backlash from the businesses and the impacts to use downtown. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what happened in San Luis Obispo and whether that story has influenced or changed our staff's perspective as to whether these proposed changes are really the right approach for a downtown.
Certainly, Councilmember Harmon, through the mayor. So I'm not up to date on what may have happened last night, so I apologize and I can't speak to that. We have had conversations with San Luis Obispo and their parking management, though, to understand their system. And just to clarify, they have had on-street price parking and a rate structure that's very similar to ours for quite some time. So that's not, it wasn't a new introduction of price parking there, I believe. It's something that had been around. I know that there had been some back and forth as to whether they had a free period in their parking garages. And what we had learned from talking with our colleagues there was that, there had been some changes to an initial proposal that was made based on, similar backlash, but they were aware that they couldn't afford that basically for more than a year. And so that there was this kind of outstanding issue with their city council and what they were going to do going forward. Like I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what might have happened last night at this point, so I don't want to speak to that, yeah.
No, I totally understand. I will say, from what I read, not only did they go back on the proposal, they made parking cheaper than it was before they proposed this new idea, and the council apologized. So that is of some major concern for me, and without editorializing too much, I would be interested in us learning from that experience as we do or don't move forward, because that was very surprising to me to read and had a huge impact on my own perspective. And then my second and final question is for Mr. DeMartini. In connection with the general fund transfer under the alternative proposal, whether or not we implement new systems, I mean, we'll have to do something, but just thinking about this $979,000 here, you said that this would come back to us, or we would think about it through the balance of the budget process by looking at what we would have to take away or change and how this would work. Do you anticipate that, I mean, I guess, I'm trying to think of how to say this. We will either have to cut something or use general fund reserves for this $979,000, right?
Councilmember Harmon, thank you so much for that question. So I think there's a couple ways that we can look at it. So depending on what policy direction council gives us today, we will then adjust our revenue and expenditure budget in the downtown parking fund accordingly. I will then look at what this revised deficit would look like based on changes that are made, and I will also evaluate the level of reserve in the fund and how far below it is from the policy target level. And that's how we kind of came up with that general fund transfer amount. What I will say is if the revenues come in stronger or they have savings on their expenditure budget, sort of as we monitor their budget throughout the year at Q1, at Q2, at Q3, and if we determine that that transfer is not necessary, we won't do it, right? It's there in case we need to. And it's there, and I recommended it because of the uncertainty or the risk associated with implementing a program such as this. There could be delays with implementation. There could be a whole host of factors that could potentially make the budget not come to fruition. So we wanted to budget for the transfer in case it was needed and then monitor.
So thank you, that's helpful. Let's assume that the transfer is going to occur, or it has occurred. What's the impact to the general fund budget? That's really what I'm getting at. I want to understand, it'll have to come from somewhere. So is it going to come from cuts to other areas that are subsidized by the general fund, or is it coming out of general fund reserves?
Yes, Councilmember Harmon, thank you for that. So in the proposal, in the recommended budget, the transfer is $500,000. We have budgeted that transfer coming out of the general fund into downtown parking. And so effectively, it is coming out of general fund reserves.
Okay.
Council could take an action if they wanted to reduce general fund expenditures somewhere else to sort of offset the additional transfer that might be required. That could be something that could be considered. Short of that occurring, it would come out of general fund reserves.
Okay, so it really is, you might say, an ad hoc use of our reserves. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Councilmember Harmon, if I could just circle back to the San Luis Obispo question. Thank you to Megan for having her laptop here. So I just want to clarify, it looks like they voted to lower their on-street parking rates from $4 an hour in the downtown core and then $2.25 in what they're calling the outer core, so further out. And so that's comparable to what we'd be proposing with the $3 an hour, although they don't offer any free period. And then off-street in their parking structures, they'd be lowering it from $3 an hour, which is what we have now, to $2 an hour with an $8 daily maximum. So again, very similar to what we'd be proposing, except right now they do offer the first hour free, and they did vote to eliminate that. So they are actually eliminating their free parking period.
So that wouldn't change staff's recommendation vis-a-vis these proposals?
I mean, not in this
I don't want to put
case.
you on the spot.
No, I certainly understand, and we understand very much that this is a, that this is something that is going to take time for people to get used to, just like it was, every time that we have raised parking rates or even begun to charge for parking. Once upon a time, it was free on Sundays downtown, and now and again, somebody still reminds us of that. So that is understood, but again, what we're proposing is very much in line with this, although we are retaining a free parking period, whereas they don't have one.
You should have another question, Ms. Gutierrez?
I have two, and you can answer them really, really quick. How did you project the revenues? And then the second question is that the new technology that we are going to buy, because we really need it, can it like tell us every month the income that it comes in, so we can monitor if this fee increase is actually helping us, or if we're like in the negative numbers still?
Certainly, Council Member Alejandra Gutierrez, to the mayor. As to the technology question, yes, absolutely. Any parking access or revenue control system does that. We can do that with our current system. We actually, every night at close, our parking coordinators send around an email which breaks down exactly how much revenue we brought in for that day. So that's something we look at very carefully and constantly. And then I will allow Megan to describe the process for making these projections.
Thank you, Ms. Salas.
Councilmember Gutierrez, through the mayor. So a couple of different ways we projected the revenue. For on-street, it was certainly a little bit more complicated as we don't have anything to use as a comparison. But what we did work off of initially was that we did have consultants who prepared a very kind of high-level revenue projection based off preliminary numbers a few years back. So kind of use that as a launching point. Their revenue estimates were actually higher than what I've built into this. I actually applied a 75% occupancy to our on-street parking, which is a lower occupancy rate than they had used. And I only I only used a 3-hour per day use of the spots in this. I wanted to make sure that we were being very conservative in our revenue projections. Whereas they had actually recommended 4 hours per day in their revenue projections. So that's where we arrived for the on-street revenue. So we certainly could actually arrive at a higher revenue than that. And again, in the parking lots, based it on the number of people that on average within the last fiscal year have stayed in the lots for each duration period, and then applied behavioral impacts to those numbers to arrive at the revenue.
And just for clarification, this department is in this economic state, and it has to do with, we haven't increased fees in very, very long, and COVID took a big hit.
Yes, Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez, it's a combination of factors. So yeah, we went too long basically without adjusting our fees. Also, as discussed earlier, there were a number of other obligations that were placed on our budget during that time. We had the dissolution of the RDA, which was a loss for some of the facilities. And then, we have the sort of fundamental change and shift that has happened since COVID. So, the numbers that were run in terms of determining, what our funding shortfall was that was done before the pandemic. So this is not a new problem. As I noted, we found graphs going back to 2015 that showed us in this situation, essentially. So, this has been a problem that has been looming for quite a while.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Quick question from Ms. Salas, as long as we have you up there. On the San Luis thing, did they end up dropping their monthly price from 85 to 45 as proposed, do you know? You can look that up.
Mayor Ross, unfortunately, sorry, I didn't get to that part in the article, and my computer shuts off every time I close it, so.
Okay, that's right. I'm just looking at something. This was a May 11th press release on San Luis and what they were proposing. So, and obviously yesterday they probably figured out what they were going to do. Okay, that's fine. Real quick on the CDB area, or say CBD, let's see, anyway. The areas around there, I know that when you're going to propose doing an RPP program, that you have to do a survey and have a vote on. Are they already all qualified, the surrounding neighborhoods, for RPP programs?
Mayor Rouse, yes. So we have 6 permit parking areas that are already designated and have been in place for decades in the downtown area. Those run from the freeway on the south all the way up to Arriaga Street to the north, and then from the freeway on the west over to Olive Street on the east. So that whole area, not every street has actual signs on it, but it's all been already established as a permit parking area.
And how many permits per household is one allowed?
So you are allowed to get, each individual dwelling unit can be issued up to 3 vehicle assigned stickers, and those have to be issued to an eligible resident. We don't just,
Right.
give you 3 stickers to pass around. You've got to give us the actual vehicle registration, and 1 transferable visitor permit. So that's like a placard that you can place in your windshield. We also offer 1-day, we call them like party passes or
guest
guest
ones, right.
passes, yeah.
So, and as an ADU, which is a rather new phenomena, are those also eligible for their own RPP stickers?
Yes, they are.
So a single-family residence plus an ADU could do that, and then, of course, if it's a because there's the number of multifamily or multi-unit proposals in the downtown that are in the pipeline. And they, of course, nowadays do not have to provide the parking whatsoever. So that's what I was kind of getting at. Are they going to be part of the RPP or eligible for that? Or are we trying to anticipate whether or not they could be worked into our parking pass program monthly thing? Is that, because this
Sure.
could be a big impact as we go further out from these neighborhoods.
Mayor Rouse, certainly, and that's something, I think citywide, different neighborhoods are, we are seeing complaints and things like that about the density and the increase in parking there. So, that's a known issue across the city. There are sort of 2 different components of your question. First off, the eligibility for the parking permits. For ADUs, they are eligible. Those are ministerial approvals under, per state law and per the city's code. For larger multifamily developments, those types of developments that go through, let's say, a planning commission approval process, often have a condition that's attached to them that precludes them from eligibility for RPPs. So that's something, some of the newer apartment buildings around town actually are not eligible for RPPs, but it is, it's specific to the project. There's nothing currently in the code that precludes them from that. However, we are well aware that Chapter 1046, which governs the residential permit parking program, is quite out of date at this point and really doesn't address a lot of the newer challenges that we're seeing in the way that our city has changed since it was originally adopted back in the 80s. So it has been on our to-do list for quite some time to update that. That is something that this effort would certainly accelerate, and at that time, that's when we'd be able to consider, okay, how do we want to consider multifamily dwellings? Do we want to change the limits that are available on the number of permits that are available, things like that, depending on what the neighborhood needs are. So bigger conversation, and one that we know that is coming.
Thank you. Last question. On the slide 13, we have the revenue control system at 1.5 million. Was that for a new control system for the lots, or is that also considering the on-street metering machinery?
Sure, Mayor Rouse, so that is just for the parking lots, and I want to sort of caveat this as well, in that we know that this is likely to be probably not nearly enough money to actually purchase a system. What we are hoping to do is a lot of these companies now, because it is such a large capital investment upfront for this equipment, it is more expensive than you could probably imagine for some of these little components. Is they offer different sort of financing or lease type purchase agreements that let you get the equipment without having the same upfront investment.
I did some research on that. I've got an offline conversation with you about that. So where is the proposed on-street parking machinery cost reflected? In what column?
So that is not reflected in
didn't
this alternative proposal, because under that scenario, if you're to go with the pure alternative as opposed to the hybrid, we wouldn't be proceeding with that on-street deployment. However, as I noted, we want to make sure that whatever park system we did procure could also be easily rolled out to the street. So in that way, they're sort of dovetailed.
All right, very good. With that, I'm going to go to public comment. Thank you for your patience waiting to speak. We'll start out with Patricia Owens. You have 3 minutes at the dais.
My concern is with the residential permanent parking. Right now, we're not having any enforcement at all. And it's become difficult. Sometimes I have to, and I'm 74, sometimes I have to walk. I get up at 10, I go get my car from 3 blocks away, and I bring it back. Across from Anacapa Street, or Anapamu Street up, we have permit parking. We have D parking, then we have C parking. And we're all scrambling. Now, there's one block on Anapamu below Spencer Park that does not have permit parking, and there are 50 apartments on that block. And I had been working with the parking department. We were getting a petition to have that turned into D parking because the surrounding blocks, we need it. The D parking is limited. And they told me that I had to wait until you made decisions here now to see if we could do it. They were all for it, but now there's a stalemate. But if we have metered parking in our residential neighborhoods where people live, they will come and take our parking, and we will be walking away and having to park away from home and then come back late at night. And it's a challenge. And I think that the city needs to consider this for all the permit parking in the city that's available for residents. And also, I might add, although I'm not supposed to, I think if you guys really want to know what people feel about State Street, you should do the old-fashioned thing that Gary Hart did. Senator Hart, you go put your card table up in front of the supermarkets, and you ask the residents what they really think, and they will tell you. I know what a lot of people in Bel Air Knolls feel. I know what a lot of people on the Mesa feel. I know what they feel like in San Roque, and I do know that a lot of them don't feel like they're being heard about State Street.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Trey Pinner.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Trey Pinner, and I serve as the current chair of the Downtown Parking Committee. I appreciate you guys taking the time on this. I did also speak at the Finance Committee on this topic. I do also want to recognize staff and the work they've done with this, as Councilmember Jordan pointed out, and all of you. We've had numerous meetings on this and this topic for many years. So it's to me, this is not just a finance issue. This is a policy and operation issue. We're trying to figure out how to best manage the downtown parking system. And I think what staff has brought forth to you in the original proposal is the best alternative for the downtown parking system. And I think these modifications will be impactful and create a unified parking system. Right now, we're really running these 2 separate parking systems, the on-street and the parking garages and surface lot. I think this brings it all together. We all agree downtown is facing some challenges for sure, but I also want to point out businesses need to be reminded that the parking system helps their business operate, and the parking system has eliminated the obligation for them to provide parking on their own site or when things are being developed. That's what this parking system is doing. It's collectively allowing all the businesses downtown to be successful, but it does come from some costs. It does need to be maintained and operated. This is not looking to be to make a profit. We're just trying to keep it going so the businesses can have opportunity for people to come down and park. I think the issue that I was going to bring, and I'm glad it came up about San Luis Obispo as being a good model. I think it's an excellent model, and I know these changes recently just happened, as Councilmember Harmon just recognized, but actually the proposal they've made is in line with the proposal that staff is making to you all today. They have no free parking on street, and they've now eliminated free parking in the garages. So I do think it's important to note that it's very hard to answer the question, exactly what will this do to the impacts of who comes and doesn't come. Who comes is people who want to be downtown and have things downtown that they want to go to. If they're there, I think they'll come. Obviously, there's a factor that if parking was, $20 an hour, that would have an impact. But are we within the realm to make this parking and system successful? I think we are, and I support staff's proposal to you and hope we can move forward. Thank you very much.
Very good. Michael Chiakos?
And just a quick announcement for those who are online, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak on this item.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Chiakos. I'm the Director of Climate Policy at Community Environmental Council, and we support the original staff proposal to charge for on-street parking, not the new alternative proposal. And I admit I love free parking as much as the next person. I usually bike downtown, but when I drive, the problem is on-street parking is never available. People do the 75-minute shuffle. They park for hours at a time knowing they won't get a ticket. I work downtown. I see even some of my well-paid colleagues sprint off after meetings to waste time driving around looking for free parking, and this is very disruptive to downtown employers and to workflow. Some studies have put 30% of all congestion in urban downtowns due to people looking for parking. I'm sure we've all driven around and around and around and around looking for parking. Pricing on-street parking will mean more parking availability for shoppers to park right in front of the businesses that they're patronizing. It'll decrease congestion in cruising for parking and encourage people to park in the lower cost garages, as well as biking, walking, carpooling, or taking transit downtown. And it is due to these environmental benefits that CEC strongly supports price parking on street. In the city's last climate action plan, the second largest mitigation measure after switching the entire community to 100% renewable electricity was pricing parking downtown. This is because it provides a small nudge to choose alternative transportation. The downtown employee might take the bus from Ventura instead of driving alone, or might bike or take their electric scooter from the west side. It gives another reason for someone to jog or bike to Gold's Gym or that yoga class, or for the potential drunk driver to walk downtown to patronize our restaurants and bars and then call the Uber home. It is bad public policy and horrible environmental and climate policy to subsidize driving, parking, and overutilization of cars. One proposal up for a vote today would subsidize parking and increase the city's deficit by millions. It's crazy we would subsidize driving and have to cut budget for library, parks, fire, police. The original staff proposal is well thought out. The cheaper garage parking will be mostly used by locals who know also where all the free lots are. Tourists won't blink an eye to pay for on-street parking or in the surface lots, as in their hometowns and almost all major downtowns charge for parking. Santa Barbara is an anomaly. I grew up here, I get the sentiment, we want a small town feeling, free parking. Thing is, we should not be subsidizing too many cars and excess driving. Around half of Santa Barbara's greenhouse gas emissions are from transportation, and similar for California. We have a carbon neutrality goal here in the city of Santa Barbara by 2035, which is antithetical with subsidizing parking and more driving. Thank you.
Angela Miller-Bivin?
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council, thank you. And thank you for all the hard work that you guys do, because I do appreciate it. I grew up in Santa Barbara, been here my whole life, lived downtown. I know that a lot goes into this. I am the Executive Director and CEO at Unity Shop. We fall within the map of where you want to put metered parking. In this proposal, it would really hurt our clientele. We see about probably between 100 and 125 people a day coming to us for to get food, essentials, and clothing. Our numbers are growing. The people that come to us can't afford gas, they can't afford housing, they can't afford daycare. So if we were to put metered parking in there, there is no way they could get in and out of our facility within 30 minutes. Sometimes it even takes them longer. And with due respect, I'm a parent. I have never been able to get my children out of the car 15 minutes in and out of a store ever. I hope there's someone that can do that, but I personally could never do that. But I just hope that you would take that into consideration, because Unity Shop is a very important part of this community, and so are the individuals that we supply food and essentials and clothing to. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Janet Berg?
Good afternoon. I really want to appreciate all the hard work, mayor and city council members and all the staff. I mean, this is a lot of work and a lot of energy is going into this. Good questions are being asked, and I really do appreciate it. I'm always looking at the unintended consequences of anything we do, and it's so hard to know because we had the pandemic. Behavior has changed, and trying to predict behavior is a very tricky business. But I do want to encourage that we proceed with caution. You know, one of the things about downtown parking, it's like winning the lottery. When you get one of those spots, it's hooray, you got a spot, and if you don't, you go pay in the parking lot. But there is some kind of like special, motivation. And Mr. Caruso said at, I think it was the CEC meeting, he said, let's bring joy to downtown. Let's have that free trolley. Let's do what we can. And I mean, I know it seems like kind of petty to think that parking would even getting a free spot on the street would bring people downtown, but I actually think it might. And if there's some way we can compensate for that and still meet our needs, and looking at the budget in general, I think there are resources to improve what we can do with parking, bring more people downtown, and improve the revenue of the retailers by not charging so much for parking. It's very hard to predict all of these things. I remember from the last meeting, I think it was you, Megan, that mentioned how hard it would be to get anywhere in 15 minutes. And here's the scenario. You're walking down State Street. You've got 15 minutes. You've got to get your pickup. It's like, oh, excuse me, can I get mine? And I don't have time for a tip. And you're in a big hurry because you're trying to meet that. Or, oh, please go ahead, and you open the door for someone, and you've got time to stop and go into Daisy's and pick up the chicken salad, or go into Domicile and look at the cutting boards. There are so many things that when we relax a little bit and take a breath, we can bring joy back to downtown. And so I just think that the street parking being free is one of those little things. If you want to create a lottery system of some kind where people can put money in and they win the ticket, then they get this, you can maybe subsidize your street parking or do an auction like they do at the schools, right? Maybe somebody will pay a lot of money for a couple prime spots and then you don't have to do the street parking. There are some fun things we can do. I want to put adult teeter-totters on State Street. I think that could be a lot of fun. Maybe some swings. Let's think about how we can bring joy back to downtown. And parking is just one of those things that's irritating. You just can't help it. I'd rather pay a flat yearly fee for parking than have to have this little, it's just an irritant. And I know you guys have to have hard work to do. You've got tough decisions to make, but I hope you'll just consider the unintended consequences and bringing joy back to downtown and some sense of livability, breathability, space, time. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, we have speakers online.
We have 2 raised hands. We have Joanna Kaufman and Anna Marie Gott. Joanna Kaufman, please go ahead.
Hello. I am a resident of the Upper East Side. Firstly, thanks to staff for putting together a thoughtful and coherent plan to address a big problem. This really was an amazing presentation, one of the best I've seen. I appreciate the move towards flexible and adaptable, which is a direction all cities should move in. Sound parking and pricing policies tend to go against public perception, like freeway widenings. Time and time again, research shows that adding lanes to freeways do not decrease traffic. Research shows that widely available free or low-cost parking actually hurts the community and the small businesses that we believe it's supposed to help. The truth is that parking takes up valuable real estate that could be producing economic benefits for the city. Surface parking and free on-street parking downtown is not the highest and best use of much of that land. Our city is overparked, and we largely subsidize this parking under the guise of economic development in fear of political repercussions. There is danger in getting in the practice of routinely subsidizing the parking program with general fund and Measure C dollars. Last week, I attended a town hall with the mayor and city officials where I learned budget cuts are needed to accommodate for a decrease in the general fund. Albeit this money that we're talking about today for the alternative would come from reserves, it doesn't make sense that our parking system can't reflect its true costs. What does it mean if parking is collectively costing us money and being subsidized by funds from citizens that don't drive or park downtown? I searched for any studies or proof that free parking leads to improved economic outcomes, and I couldn't find anything. I'm really interested to, who at the Regional Economic Forum made a statement otherwise. If it was Rick Caruso, I'm skeptical of any advice he has to offer anyways, from my experience of visiting some of his developments. In my research, I found a wealth of research on the benefits of eliminating parking minimums and pricing parking to reflect the true cost of parking. In fact, there are whole books written on this subject. People study this and do their PhDs on it. Not paying for the true cost of parking and maintain our parking system is at the expense of transit, walkability, and now potentially the city's general fund reserves. This makes us, as a city, less resilient. The proposal to modify surface, garage, and on-street parking pricing is a correction of a system that's been broken. And I'd like to address the subject of equity. The availability of free or low-cost parking negatively impacts our neighbors who cannot drive. This includes low-income and disabled population that take transit. And really think about how much money are we spending on parking versus creating a more robust transit system. I heard one of the council members mention that taking transit is infeasible or not as convenient. And so I think we really need to ask ourselves why and how we can improve that, because I think it would benefit other policies that we as a city would like to accomplish. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Anna Marie Gott. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Well, almost. Council members. I'm just going to tick these off on a list. On-street parking. Staff says on-street parking is hurting the parking fund, but both the on-street parking and the parking structure offer 75 minutes parking for free. So I don't understand how that is hurting them, because if you stay on the street for more than 75 minutes, you'll get a ticket. But if you're in a parking structure, you'll pay $2. The deficit is $2.5 million. And if we're talking about pay by plate, the report doesn't explain all of the hard costs to actually implement the metered on-street parking. And it also doesn't say if any of these kiosks will take cash. Staff says that they're going to use apps. Using an app-based solution disproportionately harms lower-income residents, seniors, and those with disabilities. You know, it's well documented that 15% of the population doesn't have either a smartphone or a credit card. And an app-based solution will, really shouldn't be used at all, because we are going to be discriminating against those who have credit cards versus those that don't, those that have smartphones versus those that don't. And based on staff's own description, they say that they're going to need pay station signage, payment apps, mobile web services, license plate reader, enforcement equipment, enforcement vehicles, handhelds for free notices, and safety equipment, plus people's time. So they're going to have to hire people to go around on those, in any sort of vehicle to actually put a ticket on someone's windshield wiper. So this is going to cost $1 million or more just for the kiosks, but we don't have any estimates for anything. And you really need that to make a decision. Regarding hourly or all-day parking, there was a suggestion of a $10 all-day parking, that's kind of ridiculous when we've got the Canary and other hotels that are going to be paying $33 a day. If you must go with some sort of $10, a day parking fee, limit it to like 9 hours of parking. Someone needs to, spend that much time downtown, maybe they're working there for the day, that's fine. A $10 for 9 hours versus totally eliminating that $33 fee.
Thank you very much.
And
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Mayor, that's a final speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll bring it back to council for comment. We'll start out with Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I have maybe too many notes here. I'm going to try to distill them down. I think holistically, it doesn't make sense to me for downtown parking to be an enterprise fund. And I realize that's not going to take care of the structural deficit per se, but I want to start there. I mean, if we have to use air quotes to talk about it as an enterprise fund, and we talk about funds being less restricted and subsidizing this fund, I think we need to just really look at it as general fund and prioritize the services for downtown, for homeless initiatives, for environmental initiatives, without trying to tie it to an air quote cost recovery. And that's just my opening statement, is that I think we really need to look at that separately. I think that increasing fees in the end really hurts our downtown, and I don't think of downtown just as a mall or as a money-making venture. It's our backyard, it's our civic center. It needs to be accessible for all who live here. We were talking about other areas, including San Luis Obispo, but in Ventura, they switched their structure to be paying for street parking and then free parking in their lots. A couple different levels of their lots are free parking. I think that's a model we could look at. I'd prefer having the lots be free and some paid street parking, as opposed to saying it's more equitable if everything's the same and just saying, so we're going to charge for everything. We're looking at every single person having to pay in some way. And when we talk about in this meeting about what people are willing to pay, I think we're referring just to people of a certain income bracket are willing to pay. If we look at the conversation we had about subsidizing our B-cycle passes and how low that fee would need to be for, is it maybe 50% of our community? And if you factored that into to passes for income qualified, if you took that out of the equation, and then if you took out of the equation $1.5 million to maintain the expensive, complicated mechanical, electronic infrastructure needed for this, and then the $1.5 million to maintain what our last $1.5 million that was supposed to take care of the structural deficit of downtown parking, I think we just are putting money into maintaining a structure that maybe if it was just free parking in at least a couple of the levels, we wouldn't need to be paying $1.5 million for new and $1.5 million to maintain, and then new staffing on top of that too. So I'm not saying that hyperbolically. I think we really should look at free parking on at least some of our levels of our parking lots. I think, the downtown worker shuffle is not acceptable. That 75-minute shuffle, it's not good for the environment. We know that clearly. It's very bad for labor practices. People are using their precious 15-minute break in long work days to go out and stressfully go move their cars. And when people are making minimum wage, and I know that there are workers at our own police station who are hourly or civilian workers who are spending their break time going to move their vehicles. Same true with our library workers. So people who aren't only visiting our civic center, but are staffing our civic centers to do this very stressful and environmentally impactful practice of moving things around. So I think that it's not good, the downtown shuffle, clearly. Also, along the lines of what we do when we're trying to incentivize people coming downtown, I'm thinking of the Thomas Fire. When we couldn't get revenue downtown, we made it free parking. That's like traditionally what we do when we need a bump in revenue for people to come downtown, and it works. We see the numbers go up when we offer free parking. So I think we could make up some of that revenue by people choosing to come downtown. And, if you don't own an e-bike, or if you don't already live close to downtown or on the Upper East, downtown is not easy to get to. We do not have a robust transit system. I'm all for having a robust transit system. I miss the 22 bus that used to service the hillsides. It doesn't exist. If you live in the hillsides, you cannot get to downtown and do all of these things that we're trying to encourage environmentally and be able to go back. And if you have 1 children, 2 children, 3 children, that's not happening either. If you're older, that's not happening if you can't just hop on your e-bike and come downtown. If you're not Nick Welsh, who's in the audience here, who bikes everywhere, that's really an anomaly. So it's not realistic to say that if, we're going to incentivize alternative transport when it doesn't really exist. Also, downtown is a neighborhood. I think that gets lost a little bit in here when we talk about pushing cars out into the neighborhoods. Downtown itself is a neighborhood. People live there, and that parking is impacted. So if it was free on a couple of levels in the structured parking lots, people would just go there and park and not do the circling and not move into the neighborhoods also. I think I already mentioned all the extra money that goes into maintaining this system. Environmentally, I believe people drive further for free parking, and that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just the circling to try and get the free parking. I might just drive out to Goleta instead because it's easier, it's free. I don't have the stress of wondering where I'm going to park. I can just park. And again, particularly if I have mobility issues, if I have kids in the car, if there are other considerations of that too. So I think we need to look more closely at the environmental impacts. We need a robust transit system. But when I look at that out of our broke, structurally deficit downtown parking fund, we can't pay for a shuttle, then I say that that's the wrong fund to be looking at it from. We need a shuttle. We need it for accessibility. We need it to be welcoming downtown. We need it for locals. And I think the argument that we can't pay for street cleaning, or we can't pay for a shuttle, or we can't pay for these things because downtown parking doesn't have money, that to me structurally, that we've been talking about since 2015, there's a structural problem with downtown parking being a air quote enterprise fund. I just think that priorities of things to fund don't need to be coming from a self-perpetuating fund. In equity, I think of downtown as a park. I want it to be accessible, welcoming, free. De La Guerra Plaza, we do updates to De La Guerra Plaza, and then we're going to make people pay to come and passively enjoy space in our civic plaza downtown. Free speech, that's where people gather. That's where people can be. And not everybody has the expendable income to pay for parking. And to the argument that alternative transport, we just don't have the system yet set up. I think we should get there. I think we absolutely should have accessible shuttles that run throughout the hillside, that run up and down downtown in a trolley. We don't have it right now. So I think I'm opposed to this, and I think we can find the funding other places. I realize we have a deficit, but I think we need to look at it holistically. Let's look at all of our initiatives for homeless our neighbors, look at all of our initiatives for environmental alternative transport, all of our initiatives together for how to bring people downtown instead of just putting it in this sort of false enterprise fund to fund itself. These are holistic things we need for our downtown: clean, welcoming, well-lit, equitable, accessible. And I think it's too much burden on downtown parking to have to come up with the funds for all of that. That is the bottom line. And when I see what hasn't happened in the interim on State Street 2 and the light bulb going off, that all of that was supposed to be paid for from a broke fund with a structural deficit, of course nothing can happen. So I just think we need to restructure how we look at all of this in our budgets.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez.
Thank you so much, city staff, and for the community members that came out. I'm going to be very honest. I understand that we're in this situation, and unfortunately, we were in a deficit, and then it just started to get bigger, and we're here, and we have to make a very difficult decision. And there's so many other factors going on besides the increase in parking. We have a sales tax that we just talked about, water's increasing. Nationwide, we're going through this economic crisis, and there's a housing crisis. There's a lot going on. But we also have to be very honest with the public. We are also increasing the fees to make our budget balance. And yes, the community members are going to suffer a little bit, but I think that, again, I'll say it again, I don't like to compare Santa Barbara to any city, and we are not Goleta. We don't have the stores that Goleta has. If we had a Costco downtown, everybody would be here. Let's just be honest. We're in the works of creating a better downtown, and I'm very hopeful, and yes, my city is very resilient. And if we're going to talk about equity, let's look around. Are we representing the entire city? Because I can tell you that not a lot of people have bikes. Not a lot of people can afford e-bikes. There are people and families that are living in the downtown area that most of the time you don't see them. You don't hear from them. They are struggling day by day. They love to live in the city. So when we want to talk about being equitable, we really need to start being very realistic. I am in support. I don't want to touch the general fund. I just have to be very honest, because the consequences of touching that fund, at least in the values that I have with policy, is going to really affect our city a lot. I think Measure C was a fund created for these type of situations, and I commend the staff for all of the work you've been doing. I mean, you've been really taking consideration. We have this problem in front of us, and we have to deal with it. And also going out there and trying to fulfill the community needs. But as a policymaker, I have to be very realistic. I am not okay with creating a new parking fee system on-street parking. I'm all for increasing the fees on our lots, because I understand that is necessary. But to add that extra fee to people that live downtown, it's really hard right now, and for the businesses that are struggling. And let's try it. Let's do phases. If we're doing really well with our increase in parking structure, and the community we get better downtown, then we can look into on-street parking. But parking meters and on-street parking right now, I just don't think it's okay. And that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is much in Councilmember Snedden's narrative that I agree with and appreciate, particularly the relationship of downtown parking and something not called a street, that all the references I heard to a place and a park and a gathering place, I really appreciate that. I also think there's merit in just getting it out of the status of an enterprise fund, and just even today, we're probably already out right now effectively because we're talking about other funding and ways to move funding to it. So it's not really an enterprise fund anymore, but strategically moving it out of there. Much of what I heard there, though, that I agree with, actually, is still, I didn't hear answers on funding. It's still, there's still no funding answers there. So, but just in general, I really appreciate the narrative and agree with much of the intent. I'm just going to go through my notes. They're in no particular order. It's pretty clear to me there's 7 people up here. You're going to get about 23 opinions by the time we're done here. And I'll apologize up front too, because I said I would eventually go down the rabbit hole on this. I'm at some point, I think you also need to review City Hall lot and the Louise Lowry lot. Those are festering secrets, if you want to call them, for those in the know, as I heard somebody talk about them before. And any action we take here today to do anything other than what's here already will only increase the pressure and the use of those lots as a alternative outside of the format of the bigger picture. The tickle on the back of my neck is to look for ways to break down the silos, even in the department, between different areas of the operations, and look for qualifying expenses, at least in the short term, that can be borne by Measure C. In yesterday's fun marathon, I can't tell you exactly what's in Measure C that's going to be used and where 2 blocks or 3 blocks of a street is going to cost what, and could that be deferred off another year and that money used this year to help salvage downtown parking, as an example. The level of detail is not there, and frankly, I don't have the bandwidth to go look for it on 100,000 by 100,000 items. But to me, in the back of my mind, we're talking about policy decisions today, clearly, but part of that policy decision has to be able to balance priorities on where there is money available and can it move sideways, right, into different silos rather than up and down within an existing silo. So I would hope there's still more work to be done there that would help this situation in the short term. I would not be supportive of the 15-minute parking on street. I think that needs to increase. So I'll just give you my one opinion of the 23 you're going to hear. And I frame this in the context of still saying that without even my own example of what you heard of, if I can't walk well, but I don't have a handicap placard, what am I doing if I can't get to on-street parking in the same block as, or it's going to be the most expensive choice in the same block of where I'm going. But I think it should be 30 minutes on street, not 15, and then you price more stringently after that to differentiate it between surface lots and the garages. And in the context of what I said before, I called it premium, so on-street is premium, and the surface lots is not quite premium, and in the garage is standard, or what you want to do. I would also look, I think, other than pricing, to look for that 30 minutes to be consistent across all 3 platforms. Maybe not in garages, but certainly in the street and the parking lots. And then the differentiating that's taking place to, if I'm making a decision on where I'm going to park, is the length of time I'm going to park and the pricing that I'm going to see. So if I'm going for an hour, do I pick a surface lot, or do I pick go circle the lot, circle the streets, and look for the more expensive place? It doesn't sound to me like we're any closer. I heard Ed talk about surge pricing. I think back to my friends who go skiing at Mammoth. Hamburgers $30 at lunchtime, but only $6 at 10 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. And it sounds like we're no closer to being able technologically to do that, or I think in the past where we've talked about positional controls where, you know, if you want to park on the roof, it's one price. If you want to park not on the roof, it's more expensive. You know, that happens to me every time I go to LAX. I get a choice there of like several dollars a day less to park up on the roof and get the car dirty. But it also then plays a role on some of the comments you heard today on what do you do with hotels? How do you control them? How do you control pure overnight parking versus pure just longer term parking? Can you differentiate a time of day? So if I want to put a car in an empty parking structure at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night and have it out by 8 o'clock the next morning, in theory, shouldn't that be the cheapest rate in the world that you offer me? But if I'm going to park the same number of hours at 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, shouldn't that be the most expensive rate you're going to offer me? I don't know that we're getting closer to that, but I think that's where you want to go. I'm still stuck with the idea of getting rid of the PBIA. I just see it eventually wearing itself out in number of resources needed and return on that, and the ability to, if you're successful with your parking structure of where and how and when you pay for parking, if you can successfully implement that, that it's a relatively small amount to fold into that. You take it off the burden of the businesses, you attract the parkers to downtown, and the attraction is there and the pricing is right to actually just take care of that PBA amount. And if there's a way that you need a first year to do that or something, again, I'm just wondering if Measure C can't help out there to bridge that gap. We talked earlier about, and I think we've talked before about neighborhood parking permits, and I think key to both the neighborhood parking permits and anything you're going to implement downtown is over enforcement to begin with. I go back to school teacher friends who say don't expect your teacher to crack a smile for the first 2 months of class because they're setting the foundation of how they want you to act for the whole semester. And I think we have to be ready, particularly coming off COVID and the lack of traffic or parking enforcement. You know, the abuses I've seen out there when we were down to 1 or 2 parking enforcement people, and even right now, I still see them everywhere, even though I start to see some tickets being written. But I think if we say something's going to work, we have to realize that we have to put the back end effort and enforcement onto it also, or else all we've done is basically passed along that burden to people who shouldn't have that burden. And then final comment is just a big picture comment. I realize even things that I've talked about, but things I've heard other people talk about sitting up here, or even staff, is that yesterday and today there's been there's been a discussion on an artificial reduction in the reserves just by having to meet a deficit. That is where the help is at the reserves, and this city has a policy that if we're using reserves, that at the time we're using the reserves, we will offer or request staff and offer to come up with a plan to replenish reserves. And that should be key on everybody's mind. That's an active city policy. The argument on whether to reduce reserves or not reduce reserves should be had separately, and we shouldn't allow the use of reserves to artificially reduce those reserves without also complying with that city policy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, that's a great segue. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. A couple things. So when this came to Finance Committee, as many of you know, I supported this proposal, and I did that for a couple of reasons. First, philosophically, I will say the alternative, utilizing general fund money to subsidize this, is, in effect, reducing our reserve policy. It's changing that. And I understand it's a separate conversation how we're going to pay for or make up the delta in that reduction or whether to reduce the reserves. But the truth is, every budget season, we use reserves. We never come up with a way to replenish them. So while we may like to have those conversations separately, neither of them ever occur. And so my frustration and my initial desire to do whatever we need to do to avoid a reduction in reserves is because I am just no longer willing to continue to operate as if we have a reduced reserve requirement while making ad hoc decisions about funding policy. Instead, I would rather reduce those reserves and have a cohesive approach to how we effectuate our budget year over year. Instead, what continues to happen is what we're seeing happening again with this downtown parking situation. If we don't implement these changes, we are effectively reducing our reserve policy. And we don't have a way to pay for it, and we're not going to come up with a way to pay for it. And I cannot imagine when we go through our budget hearing in the next few weeks that we're going to be willing in 2 weeks when we're talking about something else that we love to slash that. We're just not going to. We never have before. I don't see it happening now. So clearly this is a personal frustration of mine, but I see it playing out again and again and again. And I think this is a fundamental philosophical structural problem we have with budgeting here. It's really, really hard to cut things. It's really, really hard to make changes. It's also really hard to consider revising the reserve requirement. What we're doing effectively is that last thing. We're just unwilling to put a name to it, and what ends up happening is ad hoc decision making that I don't think is good policy. So that was my initial reasoning for being very, very open to this proposal. I don't want to make that transfer, and I don't want to make cuts to library. I don't want to make cuts to our police budget. I don't see where else this is going to come from if not from reserves. To the substance of the changes that were proposed, you know, I'm not an expert. I really don't know very much about parking. I don't know very much about the way parking is priced. So to me, I was very taken with to the extent that this can be data-driven. Clearly, there's an absence of data that makes it really challenging to sort of tell us exactly what's going to happen. This seems to be quite a well-reasoned, and I know a huge amount of work went into it, approach. I will say over the last week in conversation with community members, hearing from our colleagues, one of the things that has begun to change my mind about whether this is appropriate for us is it's a really policy wonk, bureaucratic, and I use that in the most positive way. That's how I think of myself. So, you know, like it is, it's a very policy-oriented solution that seems to be a little bit divorced from how people actually function in the real world. And one of the pieces of feedback that I received is someone said, hey, you know, you talk about how you can't get your kids out of the car in 15 minutes. It's probably unlikely as a busy mom, you're gonna be able to think, which lot should I go to and at what point and where? And that really struck me because, you know, when I was at Finance Committee, public commenter said the same thing. Yeah, I can't do anything in 15 minutes. And, you know, if my kid's waking up every 2 hours, it's really unlikely I'm going to be able to think, which lot should I go in here and triangulate how far? It just seems very complex. From a purely policy perspective, I actually think it clearly works. From a practical perspective, I don't know that it will. And I also have begun to really sort of dig in a more substantive way on this question of what we're doing to and for our downtown and whether this is the right moment to take what amounts to a risk. And I think I'm not sure that it is. And finally, as to sort of my reasoning, I was very, I know disturbed's not the right word, but concerned by what I read in San Luis Obispo. I understand and appreciate the feedback that the fees are either higher or exactly equal to what we're proposing here, but I think the implementation and the general sense in the community about fees and increasing costs and the way that that was so poorly received in the community, to me, I think let's let that be a cautionary tale and maybe take a pause and figure out where we want to go moving forward. As to the substance, I don't, all of our colleagues who spoke had many more ideas than I do about what could possibly work. I truly don't know. Clearly something has to happen, and that advice is, I guess, worth not much, because I don't know what the answer is. For right now, I would say I don't think we have a choice but to move the Measure C funds and to at least be willing, in the event that it's necessary, I assume it will be, to make the general fund transfer. That is against, frankly, everything that I have come to believe in and feel is good government, but I don't think that the alternative works for us right now either. It may be time, if we're going to make those funds and we're going to spend that money, let's really consider some off-the-wall pilots, like totally free parking for 3 months, and we just know we're going into reserves, and so we're going to do it, and we're going to see what the outcome is. That is my preference. I think if we're going to go against sort of all the things that I think make clear policy, driven, data-driven sense, let's experiment and actually be able to come back to the table and have a little bit of data about what works and what doesn't. If we're already spending the money, if we already don't know how we're going to pay for it, then that would be my preference. And to circle back to where I began, and then I will close, if we knew that we had some leeway, if we had some extra opportunity to spend money vis-a-vis a reduction in the reserve requirement, we could have come to the table thinking, can we be as creative as possible? Instead, what's happened is we put our staff in a position where they had to find a way to fund this, could not come to us with the most creative, the most generous, the most exciting way of thinking about parking, because there's no way to pay for it. And so what we have is another year of the same thing, and we're going to be back here next year, as opposed to a really coherent, cohesive, thoughtful discussion that would allow for our staff and for us to make the best use, most creative use of resources. So, thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So back in 2018, when I was running for office, we were having this forum, and the general question is, what are your ideas on how to generate more money for the city? And I just out loud said, well, we can get metered parking. And I swear I almost got run out of this town for saying that. And I learned right then and there that is something that people definitely are not supportive of. It came up again, I think in 2019. The city staff recommended putting metered parking in the funk zone. And even in the funk zone, people were still like, no, this is going to be a slippery slope. You're going to start there, and it's going to spread to the rest of the city. So again, it's just been this consistent, do not make us pay for parking throughout the time that I've been on council. So I can't be supportive of this. I would want it to be free just to test whether or not it will bring more people downtown. Because a lot of people like to use the cost of parking as an excuse not to come. I really don't think that's the issue. I think there are other things that are causing them not to want to come downtown. And I don't think it's because it's closed either, because either way, you're going to have to park in the lots, and the lots aren't on State Street. So, yeah, I know it's pretty much almost impossible to not park or not pay for parking at this point, but I just can't support it because the majority of the people that I'm speaking to and have spoken to me are against it. So thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Just one clarifying question, if you could pull up slide 11. I just wanted to understand. So under the original proposal, there's a $500,000 general fund contribution, as I understand it. And then the question is, under the alternative proposal, so there's a general fund transfer of $980,000, which leaves at the bottom there a $500,000 deficit. So would that be an additional $500,000 that ultimately would have to come from the general fund? So under the alternative proposal, the general fund is actually 1.5 million, let's say?
Councilmember Freeman, I think under the alternative proposal, the total amount of the general fund transfer would be that $979,000 number.
And then, but it leaves that $500,000 at the bottom. Is that so if we make that $979,000 transfer, do we still have to deal with the $497,000 deficit later on?
So, Councilmember Freeman, the fund would project to have a deficit even if that transfer of $979,000 were to occur, which means that we would be utilizing existing downtown parking fund reserves. So the reserve amount would go down even further, is effectively what we would do.
Okay, so it wouldn't be from the general fund, it would
No.
just, okay, that's what okay, that's helpful. I thought it was 1.5 million from the general fund. All right, so I'll first start, I appreciate all my colleagues' comments. I think it's been a very thoughtful discussion, and a lot of great ideas, and just really trying to grapple with this is not easy. So I appreciate everyone's thoughtful, trying to bring solutions to the problem. We're all talking about, we've referenced San Luis, but no one's also referenced what happened in Paso Robles. So on May 9th, the San Luis Tribune wrote this headline: "Free parking is back for good in Paso Robles after council repeals ordinance." It was a 5-0 vote, and they had paid parking on the streets, as I understand it, and that was enacted in 2019. So a week ago, both our neighbors to the north, San Luis, reduced their rates, and Paso Robles went back to free parking on the streets with a 5-0 vote after a lot of community input. So they're grappling with this issue just like us. So as I get into my comments, the random pop culture reference of the day goes to, in the 1980s, there was a television show that was really hyped, and it was called Cop Rock, and it was a cop show musical, and it flopped, but everyone said it wasn't a bad show, it was just ahead of its time. And sure enough, 15 years later, in the early 2000s, nobody wanted to see musicals in the 1980s, and were very few. And in the early 2000s, some of the most popular movies were High School Musical and Pitch Perfect. 1, 2, 3, and however many thought. And I bring this up because Mr. Maurer, Ms. Clark, Mr. France, the good news is you're ahead of your time with your proposal. Because I think if the original proposal that you had, you're about 5 years ahead, I think, of your time. Maybe not even 5 years. We need to look at that whole system, but we need to do it when downtown, State Street downtown, is in a healthy and in a position of strength. And in hopefully a year or two, we will have a lot more clarity on what's going to happen with Paseo Nuevo, a lot more clarity of with State Street and the master plan of where we're going. And ultimately, that type of proposal, with everything you're putting, it's a lot. It's a lot for the community to digest. I think Councilmember Gutierrez was spot on. It's like people don't want to do that, and you put all that in there. But if you have the housing downtown and you have the plan for State Street, we're implementing it, we see where it's going, then you have the people living downtown in the neighborhood we're talking about, and then you have these alternative sources of revenue that are in downtown. So you're ahead of your time on that. So where do we go for now? So one of the challenges, and again, it gets back to making a change that big a position of health, is, I think it's today or yesterday, Wendy Foster announced that she's closing, or the store is closing, and specifically referenced that it was only the State Street store that's closing, and that all the other stores in Montecito, San Ynez, Los Olivos are staying open. I've been told that the Apple store, their lease is up in 14 months, and maybe it's performing or not, so that's something we need to monitor as well, is what's going to happen to the Apple store in a year from now. I don't have any numbers, but it's just something that we need to really watch over time on how State Street is performing. That's why making a change this big, this is where my concerns are, is that by making the changes in the original proposal, fewer people would come downtown. I believe that. I think it's just a feeling you get. There's data here, but there's the art to the policy. And I think there's enough track record that the fewer people would go downtown, and that would be detrimental to it. So where do we go from here? I think it is an interesting line of thought about the enterprise fund. It's a quasi-enterprise fund. We need to continue. Any revenue that comes in from the garages obviously would fund those operations. Where I have a pause, it gets back to Councilmember Harmon's comments about reserves and just our deficit in general, is that shifting some of those other costs, we're already in a deficit, so it balloons it on the other end. So I'm not exactly sure where it would go or come from to pay for all that. So I was grappling with going with the alternative proposal. I oppose that finance the original proposal to put the metered parking. I can't support going to on-street right now for the reason articulated. But the alternative proposal also relies heavily on Measure C. And the concerns I have with Measure C and using Measure C, it's the same argument that Councilmember Harmon's making with the reserves, is we're going to be back here in a year from now. And in particular with Measure C, if we delay projects, then the projects that were there that could have been built or were in there, we don't do the repaving. The price of inflation per mile of road paved or whatever other infrastructure we need to do is skyrocketing. We heard that yesterday. So by delaying that, we actually end up costing more. And the whole purpose of Measure C was to improve our infrastructure, and in particular our roads and the pavement condition index, which we are trying to get to 70, but it's still a decade out or more. And I don't know if that would put us behind or not. So for me, I have to come up with a solution. I just can't say no to the, so where I would, one, I'd like us to see if we can, I don't even know if it's possible, reconsider at least on the parklets as some type of noticing so it's there, to bring it back, to put it back up to what the restaurants themselves at least suggested, which was 3.5 per square foot rather than the 2. I'd like us to go to the 5. I mean, we've heard that the original proposal and the difference that we did is 400,000. That's significant in trying to grapple with this, but if there is a way to, as part of our budget hearings, to reconsider that, to get it to where the restaurants supported it, that's probably another 150, 200,000. If not a big deal. We'll figure something else out. But I guess where I've landed is I'd like us to consider 90 minutes free back up to 90 minutes free in the garages, because a lot of what we're proposing is trying to get people into the garages. That might even free up some of the street parking, because then you have the option if you're on the street for 75, and we are enforcing now. I just want to let the public know, we are enforcing now. We haven't been, we are. We got nine meter maids or whatever, and we got 3 more coming. So parking enforcement. And so that's where I'm at, is maybe consider going back up to 90 minutes and then funding the rest from general fund. But we'll see where we go.
All right, very good. Well, I wasn't really sure where you're going with the musical there, Eric. I'd always thought that the city council was kind of a musical all by itself. But when I got around to the point where you're actually correct is where things are changing, maybe are ahead of our time with these kind of ideas, because a lot of these ideas are more urban area ideas than they are for what we are, which is kind of a medium-sized coastal village. And with, Peter Lewis is about ready to be done with this project down there at the Staples building, and we have a lot of the things, the projects are in the pipeline. We're evolving to a better place. We're at the nadir, I think, of where we are in terms of revenue and balances right now. It's hard because things are inflationary and all these things looking forward. And I get your point about that. But the other side of the coin is we need to revitalize the downtown. It's just, this is exactly what Paso went through. This is what San Luis Obispo went through. And both of those places have much lower vacancy rates than we do. I've been up there very recently, talking to their parking people, looking at their systems, and they're down in the single digits in terms of commercial vacancies. And the place is clean, the place is well-run. I'm impressed with both those guys. It's a little depressing for me because I don't feel like we're there at the moment. But one thing, for parking staff, what's the old mantra? Parking is never free, right? Parking's never free. It's always subsidized. If you're at La Cumbre Plaza, somebody's paying for that parking. And it's built into your CAM fees, just built into everything else. So there's always a fee for parking. It's not free. And one of the best deals ever for my business when I had it was the PBIA. And I defended it because it was attacked many times over the years as maybe not being significant. It's still $1 million, and I don't know you guys, I still think that might be real money, but the difference is that it was a private-public partnership. And if we went to fight because the free period was always, or the free period, the subsidized period, whatever you want to call it, was always under attack. Back in about '96, we opened up on Sundays. We never opened the lots on Sunday, never charged on Sundays. So people go, well, are we going to get a reduction in the PBIA now? Back in '99, we went from 90 minutes to 75 minutes. That hurt for a while. We saw a reduction in head count, and then that money didn't stay in the parking fund. That went right to MTD right now, okay? And when we did Lot 6 finally, that money, $350,000 a year plus CPI, went to MTD. At one point in time, the money all went into the Plaza Fund, but it was a Parks and Rec fund before. So it never really has been an enterprise fund, and I don't know if there's any worthwhile discussion about what we call it. I really don't think it really matters. But the point about parking is it's not about a revenue source. It's a management tool. You meter in order to manage a resource. Right now, we don't have to manage that resource. We need something to manage. I'll be so glad when we have a problem again. Right now, our problem is circulation. We have the street closed, and we have different bike elements that have come into fruition that never anticipated the traffic not being on the street. So now you have a lot of confusion. Part of what we're going through right now is a lack of, not part of it, a big part of what we're going through is a lack of customers. And when I talk about customers, I'm talking about the confusion about getting around for visitors, but I'm really talking about the resistance of locals that come downtown. And it's not even so much about the pricing per se. It's about the perception, the convenience, and the fact there's nothing going on. The PBIA right now is hurting because it's not a property assessment, it's a business assessment. And what don't we have right now downtown? Businesses. Now, there might be a cause and effect, and we can argue about it all day long, but I do know that what we're doing right now isn't working, and it's really unfair to try to judge the whole system on status quo. And that's why Eric's point is actually salient, because conditions need to change. Now, what we can do about changing, well, we've all got ideas about that. But right now, it's not a fair way to look at this snapshot and think this is forever. So what I think we've all talked about so far, but with Measure C, doing these capital infrastructure maintenance and products are totally appropriate for Measure C. I get that. Not for operations, but as far as doing the kind of capital things that normally would have been within the CIP of the parking system, when we don't have any money for that right now. Truthfully, in the past, we dipped into RDA funds to do repairs from time to time, so it's not a brand new thing. And then we talked a little bit about surface lots versus structures and the competitive. People are always going to choose surface over a structure. People don't like going inside of those buildings. People don't like trying to get in and out of them. And if we ever have a little Timber, even a 4.5, those things stay empty for a long time. This is why those lower flows are so easy to give away to the county to do the things with employees and whatnot, because nobody wants to go down there. That's just human nature. Okay. Like Eric said, we do have enforcement personnel. The chief just talked about the other day, and she's trying to focus in the CBD and trying to get those things activated again, because that's one other part of the puzzle that we're not taking into account. But visitors that come to Santa Barbara from other cities understand our price structure. That's not who we're talking about here. Visitors will pay, because this is still really, really cheap parking compared to other agencies, even San Luis Obispo, so especially compared to LA or San Francisco. It's about the locals. That's who we haven't invited downtown for a long time. And they're feeling it right now. They're not coming downtown. That's the bread and butter. That's the Monday through Friday. You walk downtown with me on a Saturday, street's packed. Great, all sorts of folks there. But I've been around long enough to know kind of who's from here and who's not, and I run into one or two people I know on a Saturday. It's great, it looks vital, and they're looking around, they're not kind of shopping because a lot of places aren't open, but they're there, and that's important. We need to bring the locals back down. We've got to invite them back downtown. You know, you had the kind of McDonald's analogy about how many served, and I go, that's great, except that they're still dealing with high capacity. Now, they're struggling with that new minimum wage thing and whatnot. They're trying to figure out how to do all that. But they're still able to have a customer count that still demands that product. Although they just rolled out a new $5 meal, I think, today just to, you know, because they're worried as well. Well, we should be worried. And we shouldn't be worried so much about the actual dollar amount. Actually, I'm sorry, it does matter, because in 2006 we changed it, raised by 50 cents, and it took a big dive for a while. So we have to be sensitive to that as well. But it's important about having convenience, cleanliness, and simplicity. As we have it laid out here is really complicated, and having different structures and whatnot. And the price-time parking thing, boy, I just feel like Rob Dayton's back in the room. We're talking about Professor Shoup, because that's what happened in San Luis Obispo, and that's what was always proposed here. Those are great major urban dense models. They're not for communities like this. They don't really work. People will, and there's too many choices. People are going to the Funk Zone. They're going to CVR. They're going out to Goleta now. I mean, we competed with La Cumbre Plaza in the 60s. We never anticipated, you know, the Costco Center and all that out there. And the Funk Zone, who saw that coming? I certainly didn't, and that's been a phenomenon. We've got to compete back. We've got to win those people back. And I think that was talked about in the economic forecast as well. You've got to do something to win those people back, and right now we're not doing it. And as much trouble as this system is in at this snapshot of the Financial Times, that's not the way to do it. I do think that we should shift the funds around like we talked about, like you proposed, between, you know, it's appropriate that the general fund take on maintenance and street cleaning. That's what it used to be. That's where it came from in the first place. It was a Parks and Rec fund. It's appropriate that Measure C handle the other parts, the capital parts. The revenue equipment, you did mention it, and I was glad to hear you say it. There are companies out there that have things where you don't buy the equipment. And these days with technology, and the last thing I want to own is a piece of hardware. I'd rather just pay that monthly fee. And like I said, I want to talk to you guys offline about the people I've been talking to, because it sounds, and they were talking about a whole lot less money. The on-street parking, though, I think if we leave it timed the way we have it, and we enforce it, you're going to see a big difference. Everybody knows we're not writing, haven't been writing tickets for a while. Just haven't had the horses. Now we do. So I think we need to see that happen. So we're not going to solve all of this year. We've got to get through this budget season. I get that. But we have to be careful that we don't put a final coffin nail into what is really a struggling business. And as much as we left 400 grand on the table when we voted the way we voted to charge the parklets. But I got to tell you, those guys are hurting right now too. So I don't feel like laying a new thing on them, even though I guess it would make sense. But we're kind of looking under all the cushions for nickels right now. So I would like to see us, and I'm going to let somebody else make a motion. I would like to see staff come back to us with more information about how you would structure passes for employees particularly, how you might consider longer-term passes for local residents downtown. I think we should have a threshold like we do in the parking systems now for passes at 85%, so that we can anticipate when the system hopefully gets full again. We built Lot 6 when we had a 1,200 space deficit projected. And, it came to fruition for about 5 minutes, and then so that we're not trying to deal with managing the supply right now. We got supply. We need customers, and we need to invite customers. I don't actually believe we need to change and do a big free program. I don't even I can't even really imagine doing the 90 minutes free. But I can imagine getting us back to some kind of status quo where we had better circulation, whichever way you want to do that, and inviting people downtown, but not trying to squeeze every nickel out of every minute that people are down here. We'll do that with, we used to have $800 to $1 million in our, when we got out of parking tickets and that kind of thing for the police. I don't know, of course, that stays in the police budget, but still, that really did drive people into the lots, and you still have 75 minutes on the street, but you know what? If you stay over, it's a ticket. Well, it's about $70 these days, I think. I'm not really sure. So that's where your parking fees come from. You can park in the lot, and if you're over the 75 minutes or whatever the free period is, you're paying. I do think you had some creative ideas about maybe breaking up the hours into more fractions even. I don't know how difficult that would be. It sounds difficult. I think validation things are really tricky, and I remember we spent a lot of money doing those in the waterfront. We did those with the Harbor Restaurant, Moby Dick's, and the local waterfront lot. So I think that might be a bridge too far. It's a really intensive thing to do labor-wise. Maybe it's different with technology now. But I think you guys have some decent ideas. I just don't think we can do it all at once, and I would love to see one of my colleagues maybe craft a motion. It looks like Ms. Sneddon is gearing up for that as we speak.
I'm gearing up, and I have to say, Mayor Rouse, you are on fire. Everything you just said, I was like, yes, and I think that
My wife never tells me that.
really, that just threw me totally off. I could not agree more with just about everything you just said, and with the longevity of history in there and bringing that into play. So I think I'll take I'll try for a motion here that we would like to have brought back to us consideration of employee passes, locals passes, a consideration of what the cost savings might be in not owning and maintaining the hardware, but in looking at other options. As an aside from the motion, I'll say that's where I was looking at 1.5 million savings in the not upkeeping the revenue control system, and then not another 1.5 million in putting that in. So that's an aside that I think could be real cost saving. So bringing that back to look at us. I do think it's worth looking at a 90-minute free in the lots and keeping it 75 minutes on the street, just as an incentive to get people into the lots and out of that circling pattern. And then I think I would like, maybe we make it a separate motion, and maybe it doesn't have to be part of the motion, but I'd really like to look at this not being an enterprise fund and what that could do to open up where we might also consider receiving other funds, considering from, say, Measure B for cleaning and keeping creeks clean. Or I don't want to get too specific, but if it's not thought of as an enterprise fund, just a consideration to bring back, not to make that decision today, but of what that might look like financially. So that would be my motion, and if that's not what you're looking for, I don't need to be the one to make the motion.
So is that a two-part motion? Two motions? Because I was going to ask the city attorney about, to me, like I said, I think that it's an enterprise fund in name only, and I'm not really sure if there's any legal pluses or minuses to try to mess with that designation, or if it's just it's kind of a staff time suck. I don't know what the ups and downsides of that would be. Do you have
Yes.
Mr. DiMartini?
Mayor Rouse, if I may, Councilmember Sneddon to the motion. I think staff would love to come back to you with a recommendation about how best to transition the enterprise from the current enterprise way of financial reporting and the way that we budget to folding it into the general fund. I would want to go through a process with our auditor about how we present our financial statements, any legal ramifications of historical revenue and expenditure. So I would like to fully vet the recommendation, if that's okay with you.
So, Ms. Ostranger, does that need to be a motion, or can it just be a staff direction? Or do we need a motion for that?
It could be a staff direction.
It can be staff direction without having a motion then, is that correct? If that works for everybody? Works
Sure.
for me?
Sure, I think it is a very good idea to have it thoroughly looked at and vetted and legally done. So I think all of these were staff direction to bring back to us. So I'm happy to leave it out of the motion if that's preferred.
Very good. And that's a motion, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. If staff could bring up slide 11, I just want to make sure I understand the motion because I think I'm willing to second it. I just want to clarify. Slide 11. So I think I understood you're basically proposing the alternative proposal with a couple of modifications. One would be the 90 minutes in the garages and the lots. And then the employee permits, you wanted to do that, but also, which passes did you want to do?
I really don't want to tie it to this alternative proposal because there are a few other things to look at in there. There are employee passes and local passes, but I'm not saying at these rates necessarily. And another advantage of having it be looked at not as its own enterprise fund is that we could try things like free parking for a month or on weekends, whereas if you're having to pay for yourself, it's too hard to do.
Okay, and I support the direction to come back on the enterprise, but if you could restate the motion, because I want to understand if we're including the Measure C transfer this year as part of it.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Sutton, could I also get clarity? Are you including the general fund transfer in that motion or not?
So let me back up for a second and ask a question.
Oh,
so,
okay.
One of the things in the motion, and again, it doesn't have to be, but is considering the cost savings in not owning and maintaining our own hardware, and that is part of what's being transferred. So I'm not sure that I want to say do this transfer and that transfer at this moment, because I think we need to look at what the cost savings would be of not doing 1.5 million in, but that's a question back to you.
So you would be then going forward with the on-street paid parking?
No.
But that, oh,
That's why I'm not tying it to this alternative proposal. But, let me say, keep everything as it is right now. Take lot parking back to 90 minutes. No paid street parking. That's why this is not the alternative proposal. I can hold back and not make the motion. I'm likely to vote no if it has too much specificity about.
so could I just ask a question? And I'm sorry if I'm isn't the revenue or the hardware part of the requirements for the on-street paid parking?
Well, I don't know. There were two that were brought up. One was maintaining the equipment we already have. And correct me if I'm getting that wrong, and that was somewhere in the order of 1.5 million and could be more.
Yeah, so just to provide for some clarification, the line that was included in our capital program for our budget with no changes or under the alternative proposal, which again does not include priced street parking, is to replace that equipment that is in our parking lots. And as has been recommended, we had already planned to go to probably a non-ownership model. I would note that there are still going to be significant costs associated with making physical changes to our parking lots to accommodate that equipment. So there's still, that item doesn't zero out regardless. For example, if we wanted to save some money by going to self-service in our service lots and just having pay-on-foot stations, that's relatively inexpensive equipment-wise, but what we need to do is create accessible paths of travel. So there are other changes that need to happen that go beyond just the physical equipment. So, under any future proposal, it's not that we could zero out that line, but, certainly we can and will look at options where we're not actually purchasing the equipment.
That's why I think it's premature to say what funds are being transferred where, because we might look at Measure B for cleaning, Measure C for infrastructure, look at the different maintenance. So I'm not comfortable as part of this motion approving that yet, because this is all going to come back in our final budget deliberation.
Okay. I think I understand where you're going from now. I think I I thought we were trying to kind of shore it up because there's the deficit, but if there are options to do some from Measure B, maybe even defer a significant portion of the 1.5,
Yeah.
then, so it's basically bring it back.
Yes.
As I understand your motion, it would be bring it back with the 90 minutes in the lots and see what, and 75 on the, keeps the 75 on the streets, no meters, and then look, and for whatever the deficit is, because there will be a deficit on the capital and some of the operating, look at what sources we could look at that are outside of the quote-unquote enterprise.
And also in there was employee passes and locals passes.
Yes.
To reduce it, because they added.
I'm not doing it off of any of these options.
So just bring something new to the table?
I'm just saying, keep it status quo, except for 90 minutes in the lots, look at employee passes and local passes, consider savings through different equipment.
When you say passes, can you explain what you mean by passes? Like
Parking
they don't-
passes.
You know, I get it. So
Yeah.
for free, or are they going to have to pay?
I don't know, that would
No,
come
they'd be
back.
pa-
They
I
would pay
understand
for
they'd be paid passes, but what staff was going to come back with kind of a menu, what that could be.
Okay.
Like
I just-
employees, maybe Central Business District residents. I mean, they're, kind of leave it to your discretion to create that. Isn't that what you had in mind, Ms. Sneddon?
It is, yeah.
So I'll second it.
Thank you. And just for clarity, it's the 90-minute in garages and surface lots. That's,
Thank you. And Ms. Gutierrez, you had a comment or question to the motion?
And to look up, in your motion is also to look for alternative fundings for the technology. Okay.
All right, very good. So, Mr. Gutierrez, you have a question?
Thank you. Sorry if you already mentioned this in the motion, but are we going to be discussing like citywide parking passes?
So
For
the downtown parking program only, I think.
Only downtown, okay. I appreciate my colleagues for making the motion on such a complicated, difficult issue, but I'm not going to be able to support it. At this point, I was thinking about what my colleague Alejandra Gutierrez was saying about equity, but I was thinking about it like on the opposite end, because you mentioned that, I don't know if this was the point you were making, so I apologize if I got it wrong, but you were saying that bicycles aren't equitable, but I have to, it's way more expensive to own a car than a bicycle. We have organizations in town that give you free bikes, and it's only like $240 to rent a bike year-round. And I think a brand-new e-bike, a cheap one, is like $500. So with that compared to a car, with the purchasing of the car, insurance of the car, the gas, registration, it's a lot. And because of that, which is what made me think about it, it costs so much more money for someone to drive downtown to spend more money or to work downtown. And I don't like the fact that our employees and owners of businesses have to pay to go to work. So this is my weird logic. I would rather vote to open up State Street completely as long as parking was completely free than what we're doing here. And I know that's easier said than done and counterproductive to what we're talking about here. And we can't do it tomorrow. We'd most likely have to think about doing it after the summer tourism season or when the underpass is completed. But yeah, that just made me, Councilmember Gutierrez made me think about the equity of what it costs to own a car here and what we can do to drive business here in the city. So again, I appreciate my colleagues, but I'm not going to support the motion.
All right, very good. Ms. Gutierrez to the motion.
No, I just want to make clarity that I wasn't talking about bike accessibility. And yes, not everybody owns a bike. Not everybody can afford the $500. I'm not saying anything about bikes. I just want to bring another perspective that as much as we want to keep State Street closed and we want to encourage people to bike, everything you said was right. But that is a reality of a certain group of people. There's also people that live in the city that's not their reality. All I was saying is that if we look around in the room, there is still people that we are not representing. And I was referring on how detrimental that on-street meter, that extra cost would be for the people in the community. And again, not everybody knows of these services, so thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. Ms. Sneddon, for
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. To the motion, I want to just be absolutely clear that in the motion is not paid street parking, making that clear, and that the other, to Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, if it might be worth considering that locals passes, it hasn't been brought back yet, but might have something like income qualifying passes where it could be, but that could.
once again, I think my understanding of your motion was that staff would be directed to come back with that
Yes.
menu of options.
They'd be bringing it back with that.
Bringing it back, is that understandable to staff? Okay. Ms. Gorman, do you have this wrestled down to a sentence or two?
Mr. Mayor and Council, let me read you what I have, and then please correct me. Motion by Councilmember Sneddon, seconded by Councilmember Friedman, to bring back the following for consideration. 1, employee passes. 2, local passes. 3, consideration of cost savings in not owning and maintaining the hardware, but looking at other options. 90 minutes free parking in the garages and surface lots, and 75 minutes free parking on the street, and no paid street parking. Is that, anything else?
That was
First and
great.
second?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, very good. And if there's no further discussion, we'll go ahead and go for a vote, please.
Okay, so this will be a vote on the motion I just described by Councilmember Sneddon, seconded by Councilmember Friedman. One moment.
I'm sorry, actually, the consider cost savings in not owning and maintaining the hardware, and then there was also consider other funding sources.
I think we're doing that anyway.
So to restate the motion here, motion to bring back the following for consideration. 1, employee passes. 2, local passes. 3, consideration of cost savings in not owning and maintaining the software, but considering other funding sources.
Right.
And then 4, 90 minutes free parking in the garages and surface lots, and 75 minutes free parking on the street, and 5, no paid street parking. Okay? All right. Go ahead and vote, please.
Oh, do you have to do it verbally?
Here, let
Mike?
me, I'm gonna
Would you do
cancel.
a verbal roll call then, please, Madam Clerk?
Yes,
If we
let's do a roll call. I'm gonna
Mike can't
cancel
figure out
that.
what his button is.
Very good, one moment.
Give you one thing to do all day.
Okay. First is Megan Harmon, who is absent. Then Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
No.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Mayor Protem Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
And Mayor Rouse.
Aye. Okay, that passes 5-1 with Megan Harmon absent. Ms. Gutierrez, you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. DeMartini, with the task that you were given, if you can also bring back a presentation on how that's going to affect parking staff, the staff that works for the downtown park, for that department. Ms. Sneddon asked about the changing it from general fund to the switching of the funding for the department.
Yes, Councilmember Gutierrez, absolutely. So staff is going to go through a process to completely analyze the impact and the potential change of moving the operation from an enterprise fund to folding it into the general fund. And so that process will take some time, and we will bring back a thorough analysis and a recommendation for you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We did that completely without gunfire. And with that, anybody's got any more comments? We will stand adjourned at 4:52.